I'm so far at 33, so I'm getting there slowly but surely. It's fine.
We're
And
live on YouTube.
live.
Oh,
All
hello,
right.
Hi,
YouTube.
hello everyone.
Hi there, and welcome to our reading of Mrs. Doubtfire. We have a very small cast tonight, so it should be pretty easy to tell who's who. Vicky will be our main character, and Aubrey will be Miranda, and Jackson will be everybody else, and just about. And I'll be reading actions and descriptions. So it should be pretty easy. We're going to start with introductions anyways, though, and
I'm an idiot.
start with Vicky and let us know who you are, who you're playing, and where you're from, and where people can find you.
Hello, I'm Vicky Dykes. I'm from Central Alberta, a small town, Penhold. Tonight I will be playing Mrs. Doubtfire, who is, of course, Daniel Hilliard. And there's a couple of small parts, a female employee, a male employee, and a Spanish woman who is actually Daniel in disguise. Where can you find me? I'm on Facebook under the name Vicky Dykes, and I'm on Instagram. I'm Yoga Grandma 10. And I go by the pronouns she, her.
Awesome. Let's go down to Aubrey.
Hi, I'm Aubrey McCoy. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I'm all over the place. I'm an actress, obviously a singer, so you can find my music on YouTube or on Spotify. My pronouns are whatever. I don't really care. Like whatever. And I am from California. Yeah, Northern California. So I think that's everything.
I'm looking forward to
Oh,
your
I'm playing Miranda. Huh?
Yes. I'm looking forward to you playing the parakeet as well.
Oh, yes. I will also be playing the parakeet and other smaller parts.
And a few small roles. Yep. All right, Jackson.
Hi, I'm Jackson Gray. You can find me on anywhere with that. I live in Central Alberta. I go by any pronouns, and I'll be playing a whack load of characters, so I can't really name you one, but you'll see. And I think that's everything.
All right. Jackson, you might want to update if you can, your name up there.
Yes, I haven't gotten to the Zoom yet.
That's left over from our
Sorry.
last reading, apparently.
Yes,
So, and I'm Catherine Wilson. I am in Gig Harbor, Washington. My pronouns are she, her. Tonight I'll be reading primarily actions and descriptions, as well as a few small bits here and there. And you can find me when I'm not here. You can find me at Two Households in Fair Corona, which is a Shakespeare reading group, on Saturdays. Some Saturdays, anyways. All right. Are we ready to go down to our script? Let's see.
Let's do it.
Oh no! Wait,
Do you need a moment there, Jackson?
I'm fine. I'm just really hoping I'm not in like the first scene.
You are in the first scene, but
Okay, I'll switch over. It's fine. I can get the rest later.
essentially, if no one is speaking, it's probably your part, Jackson.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, let's see here. I'll make that a little larger. Let's see. Try to make that a little larger. There we go. And let's see. Let me just scroll down to the actual script bit here so we can see. Is that, you want it a bit larger than that? Or is that good?
It's not bad.
I can go there.
That's great.
Okay. All right. Well, I will start off with actions and descriptions, and let's see back up here. So this is Mrs. Doubtfire. Production looks like this draft is February 26, 1993. It's had quite a few revisions. Screenplay by Randy Mayhem Singer and revisions by Leslie Dixon, Brandon Mayhem Singer, and Chris Columbus.
Ooh.
So that's promising. Mrs. Doubtfire, an original Chuck Jones cartoon featuring Pudgy and Grudge. The adventures of an animated cat and parakeet plays on the screen. The camera pulls back from the screen and we are on an ADR stage. Daniel Hilliard, a good-looking, rumpled fellow in his mid-30s, stands before the microphone. He's reading off a script, skillfully putting words and sound effects into the mouths of all the cartoon characters. Seated beside Daniel is the director, Lou. 2 sound mixers and an ADR editor are sitting at a mixing board behind Daniel and Lou. On screen, the cat stuffs a cigarette into the mouth of the parakeet, who reacts to the cigarette with,
No way! No cigarettes over my dead body!
This last line is completely out of sync with the movement of the parakeet's mouth. Lou furiously scans his script, looks back to the screen, and then back to his technicians.
Damn, here we go. Cut, roll back.
The projection stops, lights come on, and Lou glares at Daniel.
That line is not in the script. Why did you add it?
We need to comment on the situation.
What situation?
Pudgy the bird's got a cigarette dangling from his beak. It's morally irresponsible.
This is a cartoon, not a freaking Oprah Winfrey special.
Millions of kids watch this show. It's like sending everyone out of a carton of cigarettes.
Daniel, this is the 5th time today.
You can't ignore this one, Lou.
You can't put words into Pudgy's mouth if it ain't moving.
So make it Pudgy's voiceover, like an internal kind of thought. Slap some reverb on it. It'll work.
A frustrated Lou puts his head in his hands and sighs to himself. In desperation, Daniel turns to the other technicians.
Oh, what about you guys? You think it's a good idea to promote smoking to the youth of America?
The technicians have no comment. They are all smoking. Daniel shrugs.
Biased crowd.
Daniel, this session is costing the studio thousands of dollars. You want a paycheck? Stick to the script. You want to play Gandhi? Play on someone else's time.
Daniel pauses. Exterior school later that day. Daniel's 3 children, Chris, age 12, Lydia, age 13, and Natalie, age 5, are about to board a school bus. Lydia is the most perceptive and brightest. She's tall for her age, slender, with shoulder-length dark hair and piercing brown eyes. Natalie is a stunning child with short-cropped brown hair, huge brown eyes, and a smile that melts the heart. Chris is thin with sandy brown, longish hair. There's a touch of the mischievous rebel in his attitude. A blue Pontiac suburban station wagon pulls up behind the bus. The station wagon is dirty, rain-spotted, showing signs of rust, looking far older than its 3 years. Daniel is behind the wheel, amidst a slew of old food wrappers, coffee cups, and resumes. Daniel spots the kids and beeps the horn. The kids turn, surprised to see their father. They run to the car. Interior Daniel's car day. Natalie hops in front, Lydia and Chris in back. Natalie gives Daniel a kiss and a bear hug. As they drive off, Lydia eyes her father suspiciously. I thought you couldn't pick us up.
Got off early.
You mean you got fired again?
Well, this time I quit. A question of morals.
Actors.
Hey, happy birthday! The big one, too.
Daniel ruffles Chris's hair, and Chris laughs.
I got a surprise for you.
Stripper.
Chris.
2 strippers?
Enough.
A party?
No parties. Mom said you couldn't have one because of your report card.
Mom doesn't get home for 4 more hours, though, does she?
Chris's eyes light. Lydia and Natalie exchange a hopeful smile. Daniel's eyes glimmer. Exterior Daniel and Miranda's house later that day. A postcard Victorian and Lower Pacific Heights. Ken's mobile petting zoo van is parked on the street. A swarm of kids are running all over, petting goats, pigs, and donkeys. The animals are wandering freely, munching on the home's beautiful garden. Daniel happily watches over the festivities as Lydia, Natalie, and Chris plays with the animals. Gloria Cheney, the Hillards' next-door neighbor, stands on her front porch, watching the birthday party with a disapproving scowl. Gloria is 77 years old. Mean, cranky. She scurries inside her house. Inside Gloria's home, she hurries to the kitchen telephone, continuing to watch the petting zoo activities from her kitchen window. She opens an address book, finds a number, picks up the phone, and dials.
Mrs. Howard, please.
Interior conference room day. The camera pans from Gregory, Henderson, and Hillard design firm logo on the wall to the conference room. Miranda Hillard stands at the head of a conference table, reviewing design sketches with 4 of her employees. Miranda is an attractive woman in her mid-30s, as meticulously stylish as Daniel is disheveled. Her demeanor is tough and quick, cool, but not aloof. Her beautiful dark eyes are strong, perceptive, intelligent. Each of the employees pass their design sketches to Miranda, who quickly makes comments and changes. A female employee gives Miranda her sketch of a hotel lobby.
Union Square Inn.
To Santa Fe. No leather. Less pastel.
Miranda is interrupted by her assistant Alice, who pokes her head into the office and knocks. Miranda turns.
Mrs. Howard, I got the bakery on the phone. How do you want your cake decorated?
As the usual, bright primaries, yellow tulips, red roses.
For a 12-year-old boy?
Oh, right. Well, what can they do?
Anything. Cowboys, surfers, baseball players.
He likes soccer. Can they do soccer players?
I'll ask.
Alice leaves, and another female employee passes a sketch to Miranda. Sammy's Bayfront Restaurant.
Too many windows. This is a restaurant, not an observation deck.
Miranda passes back the sketch. Alice again pokes her head in and knocks.
They can do soccer balls.
Oh, a soccer ball. Great. Perfect.
Alice exits again, and a male employee hands Miranda a sketch.
Endicott Shopping Center.
Ugh, too cramped. Hallways are too narrow, and forget carpeting. Go with oak floors.
Miranda's boss, senior partner Justin Gregory, bustles in, interrupting the meeting. Justin is a middle-aged man who doesn't just wear style, he wields it.
Miranda, I just got a call from Stuart Dummery.
Stuart Dumbhire?
He said you were acquaintances.
Stuart Dunmire. Mm-hmm.
He's spending millions restoring the Wellman Mansion of Nova Hills, turning it into a $500 a night B&B.
Oh, right. I read something in the Architectural Digest. He owns some European hotels too.
Right. And he specifically requested you, Miranda. I told him, you call first thing in the morning. Buying that quaint little design firm of yours was the smartest thing I ever did.
He exits. Miranda goes back to the man's sketches. A phone intercom buzzes, and a secretary's voice is heard. Mrs. Hillard, there's a Gloria Cheney on line 2. She says it's an emergency. Miranda pales. Exterior Daniel and Miranda's house later that day. Zoo animals continue to run all over the front of the house. A donkey nibbles on the plants. Several kids are still here, but there is no sign of Daniel and the family. A patrol car is now parked behind the petting zoo van. 2 officers are knocking on the door. No one is answering. Loud rock and roll blares inside. Miranda's red Volvo screeches to the front of the house. She gets out, horrified by what she sees. Miranda comes up the walkway carrying a cake box. Her eyes narrow with anger as she takes in this anarchy. The patrolmen see her. Is this your residence?
I'm sorry to say that it is.
Are you aware it's illegal to possess animals of the barnyard nature in the residential area?
What if you're married to one?
We're also responding to a noise ordinance violation.
Believe me, I'm going to respond myself. Excuse me, one moment.
She walks up the stairs to her house, stepping over a slew of rabbits. Interior foyer day. Screaming, laughing kids run through. The foyer is a complete mess. Streamers, balloons, plates of melted ice cream on the floor, piles of crumpled wrapping paper, open boxes of toys and games. Miranda places a cake box on a small foyer table. She breaks through a web of silly string and steps into the living room. Interior living room day. Some kids are dancing, blowing party horns. Others are dueling with mega water pistols and toy lasers, using the living room sofas and chairs as barricades. Miranda turns, met with a shocking sight. Miranda's POV, the foyer. A pony munches on Miranda's soccer ball birthday cake. She rushes up to the pony, trying to usher him outside.
Get out of here! Shoo!
The spook pony obeys, but skitters off in the wrong direction. It trots into the dining room. Miranda follows, furious. Interior dining room day. The red hot chili peppers, give it away, blares it from the stereo speakers. Miranda is shocked to find Daniel, Chris, and 3 other boys, all in party hats, dripping with silly string, dancing on the tabletop. The boys are teaching Daniel the latest grunge rock moves.
Here comes the spin, Dad.
The 5 of them spin perfectly. Daniel ends up face to face with Miranda. Surprised, he wipes some silly string out of his face.
Miranda, home early?
What the hell is going on here?
Don't get mad, Rand. I didn't expect you. I was going to clean up everything.
Miranda, apoplectic, grabs the industrial extension cord. On her knees, she follows it between the pony's legs to the outlet. She yanks the plug, plunging the room into a thudding quiet. Exterior Hillard house later that afternoon, day. The petting zoo van pulls away from the curb, some of the animals' faces poking longingly out the back window. The kids have all gone home, and the cops are long gone. In the front window, Lydia, Chris, and Natalie are looking on, glum. Gloria, the next-door neighbor, waters her flowers, eavesdropping on the Hillards. Daniel and Miranda are cleaning up the mess left by the party, loading trash bags with crumpled paper hats and paper plates.
He's one of the brightest kids in his class, Daniel, and he's flunking 3 subjects. You can't reward him with a party.
You only have your 12th birthday once.
Oh, okay. You're right. It's a special occasion. Forget grades. Let's concentrate on, trashing the house instead.
I told you I'd clean it up.
I'm sure you will. In some alternate universe. I'm sure somewhere there's another you that actually helps out around the house.
Hey, we have kids. Kids make dirt.
Dirt. Dirt. We live in an archaeological excavation site. Entire civilizations under beds and behind dressers, wet towels, fermenting archives of junk mail. Jesus, Daniel, there's food on the foot of your closet.
Natty and I were making an ant farm.
Miranda is bubbling with pain, not really hearing him. Gloria continues the watch from next door. Daniel glares at her.
Gloria, you mind working the other side of the fence tonight?
Gloria doesn't budge. Miranda is too wrapped up in her argument to notice. She continues.
It's not even like you're busy. You've got way more free time than I do, even when you are working.
Now Daniel looks hurt.
I already know. I tried to call you at the studio this afternoon. Lou told me what happened. Oh, Daniel, why couldn't you just do your job?
I was doing my job. My job is to be Pudgy the Bird, and Pudgy the Bird is not going to poison the hearts and minds of young America with cheery thoughts of nicotine and lung cancer. It's not in character. These kids are sharp, Rand. One step out of character, and they're on to you.
Actors.
Hey, I've got a responsibility to these kids.
Responsibility? Is that the word you just used? What about your responsibility to our children, to this house, to our bank account?
Rand.
This is too much. I can't live this way anymore. The kids can't live this way.
What way, Miranda? How do you know how they live? Half the time you come home too damn tired or too damn late to talk to them.
Excuse me for not being the only steady breadwinner in this family since we got married. Excuse me if I work hard. Excuse me if once in a while I'm late getting to this filthy rat's nest you call home.
Daniel knows he's beat there. He spots Gloria continuing to listen. He angrily calls to her.
There's a thing called privacy. Do you mind?
I'm concerned. I'm concerned. Sour. I'm concerned about Mrs. Hillard well-being. I read about people like you. You are demented man. Potentially dangerous.
What?
I heard you talking with the children using different voices, multiple personalities.
I don't believe this.
Should one of those personalities attempt to do physical harm to Mrs. Hillard, I'll be ready.
Gloria holds up an aerosol can of mace. Miranda smiles.
I'll be fine, Gloria, but thanks for caring.
The skeptical Gloria pauses, nods, and goes back to watering her flowers. Having cleaned the front of the lawn of rubbish, Miranda heads inside. Daniel follows. The kids, seeing their parents coming inside, hurry away from the windows. Interior house foyer. The kids dash up the stairs, hiding on the top staircase, continuing to listen. Daniel and Miranda enter, walking to the kitchen.
How can you be so cordial to that old snoop?
She's harmless. She's legitimately concerned about me and the kids, Daniel. At least she had a good sense to call me at work today.
Daniel is incredulous at this news, following Miranda into the kitchen. The kids hurriedly scurry down the stairs, peering around the corner to hear their parents' argument. Interior kitchen.
Oh, great. It was terrific. You and the Mace Queen conspiring to destroy your own son's birthday.
Don't make me out to be the monster, Daniel. Don't you dare. That's too convenient. You have all the fun and I get whatever's left over.
That's your choice.
Is it? Is there a choice with you? Jesus, Daniel. Even when I try to do something fun, you have to do it 10 times better. I bring home a birthday cake and you bring home the goddamn San Diego Zoo. Why am I the only one who thinks there should be rules? Why am I the only one that has to take away privileges? Why do you always make me be the heavy?
No one's making you out to be anything, Rand. I mean, you do it all by yourself. And I'd give anything to make you stop. Anything. Lighten up, Rand. I think you're spending too much time with those corporate clone heads you used to despise.
No, Daniel. I'm spending too much time with you.
What?
Miranda instinctively glances over to the foyer. The kids, caught, poke their heads back, hoping not to be seen.
Come on, guys. Upstairs?
Interior foyer, the kids turn and hurry back upstairs. Interior kitchen, Miranda turns back to Daniel. She takes a seat at the kitchen table.
It's over.
The
words scare Daniel. He takes a seat beside Miranda.
Oh, come on, sweetheart. We have our problems, but who doesn't? We'll get over them.
We've tried to get over them for 14 years.
Maybe we haven't tried hard enough. I mean, maybe we should see a family therapist.
It's too late.
Okay. Let's take a family vacation. We'll disappear for 2 weeks.
Our problems won't disappear. They'll still be here when we get back.
So maybe we're lacking something. Religion. Oh, that's it. A solid religious foundation. I'm open to a little hypocritical spirituality to keep the family together.
No jokes, Daniel. We've grown apart. We're two completely different people. We have nothing in common anymore.
Sure we do.
Miranda turns and stares into Daniel's eyes. Her expression asks him to name something. There's a long, deadly pause. Daniel ponders. Finally, he gives a sweet, tender shrug, speaking softly.
We still love each other.
Miranda doesn't answer. She turns away. The silence frightens Daniel more than anything.
Rand, come on. We still love each other.
She remains silent, gathering her strength. Daniel's voice grows softer, a touch of desperation, of hope.
Don't we?
Miranda pauses, turns, and says what she's been thinking for months.
I want a divorce.
Daniel attempts a smile, but Miranda's expression is laconic, sad, dead serious. Miranda stands and walks out of the room. Daniel just sits alone in the kitchen, alone, in complete disbelief. Interior, Frank and Jack's apartment, early morning. The camera pans across the beautiful skyline view, coming to a stop on Daniel, who's dressed in the bathrobe, sipping coffee on a terrace. He turns and walks into the apartment. We are in the workroom area of the apartment, filled with latex masks, wigs, and makeup. Daniel's handsome, very vogue brother, Frank, stands in front of a makeup mirror talking on the phone.
Yes, Mom, he's here.
Daniel takes a seat on the sofa, waves his arms to Frank.
No, don't make me.
I don't think he wants to talk right now. Well, yeah, depressed. His marriage is ending.
It's not ending. It's on a hiatus.
Frank's boyfriend, Jack, drifts into the room. As he passes, he speaks into the phone.
Hi, Evelyn. Thanks for the jam.
Jack stops the makeup mirror, opens a large professional special effects makeup kit, and restocks the contents.
She says hi. I don't know. She wants you to know when we're getting more of the Satan Bidge concealer.
Oh, next week.
Next week. You should try the sandlight, Mom. It's much better for you tone.
Daniel reacts as strange mother-son conversation.
Mom, they're waiting on the set. We're got places to be and faces to make. All right? I'm telling him. Hold on. She wants you to know if you'd like to stay with her. He said he'll think about it. Yeah, I will. Love him too, Mom.
Frank handcuffed and sits beside Daniel.
You're welcome here as long as you want.
Please, I'm not moving out. I know Miranda. This will blow over.
Interior courtroom day. Daniel stands beside his attorney, a weasel-like frightened fellow. Miranda stands at another table with her attorney. They both look up at Judge Peltzer, who is passing the sentence.
Mr. and Mrs. Hillard, although the trend of custody court has always tended to favor the child's mother, we also realize, perhaps more than ever, that it is not in any child's best interest to deprive him or her of an oblivious loving father.
Daniel smiles, looking hopeful. The judge continues.
However, since at this time Mrs. Hillard has no place, Mr. Hillard has no place to live and no employment, it is this court's decision to award sole custody to Mrs. Hillard.
No.
Mr. Hillard will have visiting rights every Saturday.
Daniel is horrified. He turns to his weak attorney.
Do something.
What? He's already passed the sentence.
At these prices, you can at least say, excuse me. Look, Judge, every Saturday, that's not enough. You don't understand. I need to see my kids.
Mr. Hillard, I would love to add this that this ruling is only temporary. I will assign a court liaison to oversee your case, and there will be a continuance of this proceedings in 90 days. I'm giving you 3 months, Mr. Hillard. 3 months to create a home, get a job, keep it, and demonstrate some capacity for adult living. If that proves to be a possibility for you, I will consider a joint custody agreement when we recombine. We're adjourned.
He bangs the gavel. Daniel is stunned. Exterior Hillard House a few days later, day. Daniel's worn station wagon is loaded up to the roof with his possessions. The kids are out in front saying goodbye. Miranda's mother, who is babysitting the kids, sternly watches through the front porch screen door. Daniel is putting on a brave, even jovial front. He gives a hug to each of the kids, Lydia's first. What about the spelling bee?
We'll practice on the phone.
You don't have a phone.
I'm getting one. Then we'll practice every night, just like we always do.
He turns to Chris, embraces him. Chris looks to the ground.
This is all my fault.
What? Why would you say that?
I should have never had a birthday. This would have never happened.
Sure it would, Chris. This has nothing to do with you. It's between your mother and I. Got that?
Chris nods. Daniel turns to Natalie.
You can't go now.
Why not?
We're right in the middle of Charlotte's Web. I was going to finish it.
Oh, Grandma will.
She's not as good. She always skips parts and she never good does voices.
Tell her to put her teeth in.
Grandma glares down at Daniel. A giant tear is already rolling down Natalie's cheek. Daniel hugs her.
Oh, hey, don't cry. I'll have a place soon, and you're going to come over and spend the night. And we'll watch all the cartoons together in our pajamas.
You don't have a TV.
I'm getting one.
Natalie nods weakly as a horn blares. Daniel does everything in his power to hold back the tears.
Oh, no, don't make those faces, guys. Everything's the same. Think of it this way. We just have a really big backyard, okay? I'll see you on Saturday.
Daniel gets into his car. The engine grinds, finally starting after a few tries. Daniel begins to drive away. Lydia puts her arm around Natalie, who is still crying. Interior, Daniel's car, moving. Daniel's forced smile fades as he glances in the rearview mirror, watching his home and children disappearing in the distance. Interior, social worker's office, later that week, day. Daniel's court liaison, a humorless 60-year-old bureaucrat named Mrs. Selner, is looking at him blankly.
Look, I'm not one of those guys that can't wait to be a bachelor and go out and get all the latest diseases. No, I need to be with my kids. So you tell me what to do, and I'll do it.
We'll be looking at two things: your living environment, and I'll be coming by on Monday and Friday nights to inspect it. And of course, there is the job issue.
Daniel squirms. She hands Daniel a sheet of paper.
Here's the nearest employment office. I've taken the liberty of making you an appointment, by the way. Do you have any special skills?
I do voices.
What do you mean you do voices?
Daniel breaks into a montage of different voices.
Well, you got your high-pitched, ethereal, small animal, or lovable Looney Tunes sort of voices like this one. And then there's the formidable authority voices, generally good for bears and sheriffs and man-eating monsters. Also, teenage voices like This one, kind of Archie and Veronica derivative. Road warrior types. Space travelers. Aspen voice. Your yuppie sympathizer and your androgynous breakfast bar testimonials. I can even do a good bureaucrat. What do you mean, you two voices?
Mrs. Selner gives a blank stare.
I'm great with kids.
Mrs. Selner doesn't budge.
I'm open to just about anything.
Exterior KTVU television studio day. A large TV studio complex of sound stages, warehouses, and offices. Daniel arrives, looking at the impressive array of buildings. Interior building G, a warehouse day. Daniel faces his new boss, your basic shipping clerk nightmare. Around them, waist high, are stacks of cans of film. Daniel stares in horror.
Wait, well, there must be some mistake. I'm working in the warehouse.
You're Daniel Hilliard, right?
Yes, but I'm an actor.
Me too. But that frickin' Tom Selleck gets all my roles. Anyway, you can take all those cans, box them, and ship them. Then you can box those cans over there, ship them, and then more of them will come in. You box those, you ship those. Any questions?
Yeah, after I box them.
You ship them.
The boss stares at him for a second, then goes. Daniel looks around in horror at his new life, shuffles to the Vendomatic, an ancient rusted coffee machine. Daniel inserts a quarter, and the coffee, resembling hot motor oil, splatters out, followed by a yellowed, faded paper cup. Daniel picks up the cup, stares at the mess. Dissolve to a picture-perfect cup of frothy cinnamon cappuccino. The camera pulls back. Miranda is holding the exquisite china cup. She takes a drink. The camera pulls back. We are in Miranda's office, and she is suddenly interrupted by Justin's voice.
Miranda!
Miranda looks up. Justin stands beside Stu Dunmeyer. Stu is tall and handsome, smacking of confidence, money, and charm. Miranda tries to control her nervousness and stands, nearly spilling her cappuccino. Miranda and Stu share a warm smile.
Stu.
Hello, Miranda. Long time.
Yeah. Yes.
There is a moment of silence as Miranda and Stu continue to look at each other, not really knowing what to say. Justin interrupts.
Mr. Dunmeyer comes by to look over your sketches.
Miranda nods. Justin, orgasmic at the familiarity between Miranda and Stu, sees this new client is in good hands.
Why don't I leave you two?
Stu and Miranda each nod. Justin exits. Cut to a lovely watercolor of the Wellman Mansion lobby. We are in the conference room. Miranda and Stu are seated at the conference table, looking over a pile of sketches. Miranda prattles on, very businesslike. Stu watches, rapt and impressed, more interested in Miranda than work.
As you probably know, the estate was built in 1876. These sketches reflect your desire to have it completely restored, remade into the stately, sumptuous inn it once was.
You look better than ever.
The lobby will resemble a music salon, with the good deal of inspiration from the French Second Empire. I was thinking of 17th century grand piano.
I've been following you in the trade ever since you've been decorating the homes of who's who in San Francisco.
A tufted sofa, Flemish tapestry, a brand-bound Regency-style table.
I love to get reacquainted. Catch up.
Mental clocks, French upholstered chairs, heavy drapes.
Can we talk over dinner?
Oh, Stu. Thanks, but that's very nice, but I'm at the beginning of a divorce.
No, the same guy? Nathaniel?
Daniel.
Yeah.
Miranda, things didn't exactly. Did we lose Aubrey?
Sorry about that. I got a phone call.
That's
I have to
okay.
go back. Uh, Daniel,
Yeah.
things didn't exactly work out.
Oh, Miranda, I'm sorry.
Stu, you don't have to.
No, really. I never held any grudges or anything. I always just wanted, I always hoped you would find happiness.
Thank you. That means a lot.
I was just wondering that when you found out I was coming in, I was worried that I might scare you off the project.
No, of course not. I'm, well, I'm flattered that you thought of me. I mean, after what happened, just,
Ancient
I,
history. Besides, I was too young to settle down. I had not a lot to do.
me too.
They exchange another glance. Stu checks his watch.
I'm late. Got a meeting at the bank. Can we talk later in the week?
Miranda nods. Stu gives her a quick kiss to the cheek and exits. Miranda stares after him, an interested smile plays across on her lips. Exterior Daniel's new apartment night. A rundown walk up in North Beach, above an Italian bakery. Interior Daniel's apartment night. The room is a steady clutter. Moving boxes, clothes, appliances, fast food containers. In the living room, Daniel and the kids sit at an ancient dining room table amidst the piles of unwashed pots and pans. They eat from cartons of takeout Chinese. The kids are morose, eating in silence. Daniel tries to lighten things up.
How do you guys like the place?
Nice. Okay.
Detestable. Detestable.
Got your point, Lydia. Thank you.
D what? Means it's stuck. State sucks.
Chris. Anna, Chris.
It does, Dad. None of our stuff's here. You haven't unpacked. There's no TV yet, and the food's terrible.
The TV's coming Saturday, and I bought a cookbook.
You're gonna start cooking?
Daniel nods. The kids stare in pure horror.
No, please, God, anything but that.
Remember your lasagna?
He used Cheetos for filling.
And ketchup for sauce.
We were out of Paul Newman.
I liked it. It was crunchy.
Thank you, Natty. Look, just give me some time. I'll learn. I'm not really used to this new lifestyle.
Neither are we. Lydia is somber. Daniel takes Lydia's hand, trying to comfort her.
I know it's hard, sweetie.
Can't you just tell Mom you're sorry?
Oh, it's not that easy, Natty. Grown-up problems are more complicated.
Complicatid.
ED.
Lydia nods. Daniel looks at the kids.
So, how's your mother anyway?
Still fine.
Sorry to hear that. I'd hate to think of her coming down with amebotic dysentery or salmonella or shingles.
What's amniotic dysentery?
Dysentery.
It's some kind of infection in your tummy. You get diarrhea forever.
Diarrhea forever?
And your body dries up and you die.
You die?
I read about it in the science books.
Why would you want Mom to die?
I don't want Mummy to die.
Then why did you say that?
Oh, Natty.
Natty starts to cry. Lydia, glaring at Daniel, comforts her sister. You're not trying very hard, Dad. We only get to come once a week. It's not very much, and it would be a lot nicer if Natty didn't have to spend it hearing things like amoebic dysentery.
You're right. I'm sorry. I'll try harder.
Daniel tries to cheer things up.
Hey, did I tell you guys about my new job?
Natalie stops sniffling. You mean you still have it?
I am capable of holding down a job.
Yes, Lydia. What job, Daddy?
Well, you take these cans and you box them and you ship them. And then you box these cans over there and you ship them. Everybody.
And gradually the
Like
kids
you
join in. Daniel leads the kids in an impromptu rap sing-along. Everyone clacks their chopsticks on their plates.
Well,
you
you take these cans and you box them up and you ship them up.
And then you box those
Cans
cans
and
and
you
you
take
take them
them
and you
up
ship them.
and you ship them.
Louder!
Sir.
Daniel stands. The kids follow him, singing and dancing around the apartment. They fall to the floor, the kids jumping on top of Daniel. Everyone is happy, giggling, lost in their laughter. Then, like a timely haunting, a car honk honk. Daniel ignores it. It honks again.
That's Mom.
Can't be. She's an hour early.
Honk!
It's got to be somebody else.
Chris gets up, looks out the window.
Somebody else with a red Volvo.
A fourth, more persistent honk! The kids leap up, scramble for their coats.
Sit down. You're on my time now.
The kids stop, holding their breath. We hear rattling from the downstairs entryway, followed by the door banging open and the click-click of high heels coming up the front step.
You're my goddamn kids, too.
A knock at Daniel's door, then Miranda lets herself in. Miranda enters, surveys the room, taking in the chaos, the danger. She can't wait to get her kids out of here. She raises a sarcastic eyebrow.
Charming.
I was thinking of a little something in a Mediterranean motif. Big, splashy Renaissance prints with those darling little cupids. And for the coffee table, only Carrara marble will do.
The kids laugh. Miranda is not amused.
Are my children ready?
No, our children are not ready. You are an hour early and you were an hour late dropping our children off.
The traffic was insane.
Oh, naturally. The traffic patterns of your own hometown would take you by surprise.
I don't have time for this, Daniel. I have to get to the bank and the store, make a drop up to the newspaper office.
Newspaper office?
Mother can't stay with us forever.
She'll be passing on soon?
I'm placing an ad for a housekeeper.
Housekeeper?
I need someone to be there when the kids get home from school to clean and start dinner.
Oh, how much are you paying this person?
$300 a week.
300 a... May I see the ad, please?
Miranda looks suspicious, but can't think of a legitimate reason to say no. She hands it to him. It reads, in Miranda's handwriting, reliable, non-smoking cleaning woman wanted. Light cooking and childcare. Call 673-1134. Oh, or 552-9653 each.
Miranda, look, why don't you save the money?
Miranda takes back the ad, places it in an envelope in her purse.
Why don't the kids just stop by here after school and you can pick them up on your way home from work?
All of the kids look at Miranda imploringly. Miranda surveys the apartment again. She gives a dishonest answer.
I'll think about it.
They can all read her. The kids' faces fall. Natalie speaks up.
Are his goddamn kids, too.
Miranda is taken aback, surprised by Natalie's language. Her eyes
No,
shoot to Daniel.
nice work, Daniel. Any other choice phrases you like to teach your 5-year-old?
If there was a remote chance that Miranda would consider Daniel's offer, it is gone now. Miranda looks at the kids.
Get your coats.
Lydia, Chris, and Natalie walk into the living room to put on their coats. Miranda follows, helping Natalie on with her coat. Daniel, alone at the doorway, glances down. Daniel's POV, Miranda's purse. The envelope with the ad protrudes from the purse. Daniel looks to the living room. Miranda helps the kids with their coats, back turned to Daniel. Daniel moves fast, slips the envelope out of Miranda's purse, and removes the ad. He quickly unfolds the ad, whips the pen from his pocket. Close up on the ad. Daniel alters Miranda's office number, changing the 1 to a 4. He alters a home number, changing the 3 to an 8. Daniel glances up. Miranda finishes buttoning Natalie's coat. Daniel hurriedly folds the ad, shoves it back into the envelope and back into the purse, just as Miranda looks up. Daniel breathes a sigh of relief. Miranda grabs her purse, ushers the kids out of the apartment as they each kiss their father goodbye. Daniel waves after them.
See you next Saturday.
Daniel grins mysteriously. Interior Miranda's office, dusk. Miranda is surrounded by auction notices, fabric samples, furniture catalogs for the Wellman mansion. She's also on the phone.
Oh, yes, I did. 2 boys and 2 girls and a boy.
Interior Daniel's bathroom, dusk. Cross cut between here and the office. Daniel luxuriates in the bathtub, speaking in an unidentifiable Scandinavian accent.
Boy, I won't work with the males. Oh, my brother was a male. No, so sorry.
In the office, Miranda stares at the phone. Daniel hangs up, howling with laughter. Instantly, he dials again. Interior Miranda's Volvo the next morning. Miranda drives on her car phone with another of Daniel's creatures.
Who was your previous employer?
Interior Daniel's warehouse, day. Daniel, surrounded by film cans and boxes, is at a payphone. This time, he's assumed a female persona, mid-20s, a little heavy metal.
Oh, I was in a band. And before that, I worked for a tattoo artist on Market Street. I got fired, but I swear it wasn't my fault. Are your kids well behaved? Or do they need like, a few like slaps every now and then?
Interior Miranda's bedroom, night. Miranda sits in bed going over tomorrow's work. The phone rings.
Yes, hello? Really? 12 years experience.
Interior Daniel's bedroom, night, a few seconds later. The kids are smiling at Daniel from a nightstand picture as he lies on the bed, smiling into the phone, speaking in a pleasant middle-aged woman's voice.
And I hope there's just a little cooking. I don't like just sit around after I'm done cleaning. Mrs. Ralston, it's lockup time. You've got 3 minutes to get back to your cell.
Interior Miranda's bedroom, night. Miranda stares in the receiver, horrified. She quickly hangs up. Almost instantly, the phone rings again. She stares at it balefully, almost doesn't pick it up. Finally, she does.
Hello? Yes. Would you tell me something about yourself? Really?
Interior Daniel's bedroom, cross-cut as needed. Daniel speaks in a patient, soothing female voice with an English accent. The dream nanny.
Yes, and I can just imagine after 15 years how attached I became to them. But they've grown up, and they do grow up, don't they? Oh, dear. Listen to me going on. Tell me about your little ones.
I have 2 girls
Precious gems, I'm sure.
and a boy.
A little prince, no doubt.
Miranda lets out a sigh.
There will be light cooking.
Oh. Well, let me warn you straight away. I'll only feed them good, nutritious food. If they're used to sugary snacks and processed sulfate Sulfated whatnots in packets. They won't find a friend in me. Oh, mind you, I've had very little trouble once they found out it's proper food or empty tummies.
Miranda's eyes sparkle. It's too good to be true.
Would you mind coming for an interview Monday evening, say 8:30?
Love to, dear.
Wonderful. I'm in the city at 2640 Steiner. Oh, could I have your name?
My name?
Your name.
Oh, so sorry. I thought I mentioned it.
Frantically, he looks around for something. He grabs a newspaper. The headline reads, Investigators doubt fire was accidental.
I'm Mrs. Doubtfire.
Interior, Frank and Jack's apartment day. Frank opens a door to find Daniel.
I need professional help.
Well, thank God.
No, Frank, from you.
Frank looks at him dubiously. Interior, Frank and Jack's workroom, a little later, day. Daniel is seated at the barber's chair before a mirror. Frank wraps a long stretch of pantyhose around Daniel's hairline. Jack stands in the background watching. Frank pulls the two ends of the nylon together.
Here we go. Instant eye lift.
Daniel's expression, eyebrows and forehead are stretched up and out, giving him the shocked expression of a bad facelift. Frank ties the nylon into a knot. Daniel stares.
Don't worry, the wig will cover your knot.
The man has a 5 o'clock shadow at 8:30 in the morning, and you're worried about a knot?
Let's start with the makeup.
I'm not waxing.
Start on a close-up of a hand mirror. Daniel's face appears in the mirror, made up with lipstick. Eyeshadow, and rouge. It's a blonde beehive wig and glasses. The camera pans around to Daniel. Frank and Jack stand in the background.
Children? Oh, why, honey, I got nothing but patience for little ones. They just start up with their horse playing and screaming, and I me up a quart of them mint juleps. And before you know it, those kids could be driving a Chevy Blazer through my audio canal. I'd be grinning all the while.
Jack and Frank both shake their heads in disapproval. We start on Daniel's fingernails being painted a bright shade of red. Pan up to Daniel, dressed as a Spanish woman wearing a black wig. He speaks in a Spanish accent.
Green card? I don't need no stinking green card.
Jack gives a disappointed sigh. Frank holds up a latex nose.
Let's try latex.
Start on an extreme close-up of the nose. Daniel has been made up to look like Barbra Streisand. The camera continues to pull back. Daniel breaks into a chorus of people. Frank and Jack join in. When they stop, Daniel shakes his head.
No, she needs to be older, more matronly, like a grandmother.
Jack and Frank nod. Daniel, wearing a large latex nose and a gray wig, brandished with a babushka, pops into frame, looking very much like Maria Urspenskaya. He speaks in a broken European accent.
Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night, then become a wolf. And when the wolf flame blooms and the autumn moon is bright, beware the sign of the pentagram.
Daniel pauses, getting frustrated.
We're in trouble. This isn't working.
Don't get discouraged. You're a work in progress. We have to do the entire face.
Mm-hmm.
A mold of Daniel's face. Frank removes a plaster mold from Daniel's face. Extreme close-ups of various parts of Doubtfire face. The Doubtfire nose is being painted. Glue is being applied around the Doubtfire neck. Lipstick is being applied to the Doubtfire lips. Eyeshadow and mascara are being applied to the eyes. And false top teeth are fixed to the top of Daniel's teeth. A wide shot. Daniel sits in the barber chair on the right side of the frame, his back turned to us. Frank and Jack stand on the left side of the frame, examining their work in progress.
We're getting there.
What does he sound like?
Oh, salt of the earth, I should say. Sensible shoes, good with plants and cats and impertinent sales clerks.
Get him out of the makeup, Jack. Get him some clothes. I have a vision for the body.
The camera follows Frank as he begins rummaging through the various bodysuits that hang on a rack behind him. There are muscular bodies, voluptuous female bodies, fat bodies, etc. Various close-up on Daniel's body. Stockings being pulled up to Daniel's hairy knees. The back of a tweed skirt being zipped. A tiny pearl brooch being fastened to a white collar. A pair of ladies' brown shoes being put on Daniel's feet. A pair of reading glasses being placed on Daniel's eyes. Close up, the back of Doubtfire's head. The gray hair is being tied into a bun on the back of Mrs. Doubtfire's head, and the camera pulls back. We are over the shadowed shoulder and head of Mrs. Doubtfire. We continue to pull back, revealing Frank and Jack on the right side of the frame. They stare at their creation, extremely pleased by what they see. The shadowed Daniel gives a shrug to Jack and Frank.
Are we close?
Any closer and we'd be giving me a birth.
Jack and Frank exchange a victorious high-five slap. Exterior Hillard House night. Establishing shot of the house. Close up on the television. The Outer Limits plays. The camera pulls back. It is after school. The kids watch TV, Natalie on the floor, Lydia on a sofa, Chris in a chair. We hear a doorbell ring. Miranda rushes into the room.
Guys, come on, turn that off.
The kids sigh. The last thing they want to do is meet the new housekeeper. Natalie and Chris are the first out of their seats. Lydia reluctantly turns off the remote control and follows. Interior, Hillard foyer night. The kids take their places in the foyer. Miranda moves to the front door, opening it to reveal Mrs. Doubtfire. This is truly not Daniel, but rather a large, pigeon-breasted woman in her late 50s with a prosthetic nose, a thick double chin, extended teeth, and a pulled-up gray and brown wig. She's dressed in a sensible tweed, her hands clutching a sensible brown bag, perfectly matched to her sensible brown shoes. She radiates strength, competence, warmth.
Euphigenia Doubtfire, ma'am.
Miranda stares, slightly dazed. Is there a flicker of recognition, or is it just Mrs. Doubtfire's slightly strange appearance?
Come in. I'm Miranda Hilliard.
Lydia, Chris, and Natty are hanging in the background, staring sullenly. Mrs. Doubtfire gives Miranda a sheet of paper.
My resume.
Miranda takes the resume, glances at it a moment. Mrs. Doubtfire notices the children.
Oh, these must be the puppets. Oh, how do you do, dears?
This is Natalie.
Mrs. Doubtfire bends down to a wide-eyed Natalie in her pajamas. Natalie shrinks, wrinkling her nose at the cologne.
Are you wearing bug sprays?
Natty.
Oh, it's all right, dear. No offense taken. I may have been a touch liberal with the atomizer. I admire honesty. Never lose that quality. It so often disappears with age.
Miranda smiles at Mrs. Doubtfire's wise knowledge.
Reminds me of the character in Stuart Little. Oh, you won't find a more honorable creature in literature. Are you familiar with that book?
It's one of my favorites.
Oh, mine too. Oh, now, why don't you brush your teeth and get all ready for bed, and I just might read it to you.
Natalie gives an excited nod. Miranda smiles as her daughter heads obediently up the stairs. Miranda motions to Chris.
This is Chris.
Oh, hello, Christopher.
Jeez, you're big for a lady. You can play for the 49ers.
Oh, I was always quite partial to European football.
Soccer?
Yes.
Me too.
Oh, I was captain of the women's team, led us to 3 university championships. Oh, but that was decades ago.
Really?
We were quite disciplined back then, always made certain that schoolwork came first. And I imagine you're the same way. I suppose by now all your homework would be done.
Well, Not exactly.
Oh, shame. Seems to me little boys who don't do their homework sometimes have to miss out on more amusing activities.
Chris's eyes widen at this almost supernatural knowledge. Miranda pauses, turns to Lydia.
And this is Lydia.
Lydia, the most suspicious, reluctantly shakes Mrs. Doubtfire's hand, looking at Miranda the entire time. It isn't fair, Mom. Why do we have to get a housekeeper anyway? Why can't Dad do it? Mrs. Doubtfire smiles ever so slightly.
That's all I need.
Oh, young lady, is that the way you usually speak to your mother?
Lydia scuffs one shoe against the other, glowering.
It isn't that I would have expected that at all. Here's your poor mother, strained from a long day's work, just trying to make arrangements to keep this lovely home in good order, and you and your siblings well fed and cared for while she's away, and you lose your temper with her in front of a perfect stranger.
I just don't see why we can't spend the extra time with Dad.
Lydia, this is not my fault. If your dad got a job, got a decent apartment, their father is the...
Mrs. Doubtfire coughs sharply.
Forgive me, dear, but surely you're in the habit of encouraging the children to step out of the room before you indulge in abusing their father.
If I did that, I might never see them.
Miranda starts to laugh. Mrs. Doubtfire doesn't. Miranda stops and smiles apologetically.
You're absolutely right. I'm terribly sorry.
No harm done, dear.
Lydia, Chris, going upstairs.
Chris and Lydia turn and begin to exit. Lydia glares critically at Mrs. Doubtfire as she walks up the stairs. Mrs. Doubtfire wipes a little sweat from her brow, then looks with alarm at the beigey fountain streaks on her fingers. She wipes them discreetly on her desk. She turns on her dress. She turns to Miranda.
A lovely spirited pair.
I'm afraid they're a little upset with me right now. Won't you have some tea?
Interior Hillard kitchen night, a few moments later. Miranda goes to the old gas stove. Mrs. Doubtfire waves her off to a kitchen chair, then sets about making tea like she's lived there all her life. Miranda scans Mrs. Doubtfire's resume. She finds something impressive.
An expert in first aid, the Heimlich maneuver, CPR. Good.
One must always be prepared, especially with the little ones.
Miranda smiles. Mrs. Doubtfire opens a pantry where everything is organized and labeled to the point of farce.
Oh my goodness, such a beautifully organized pantry.
Thank you. My husband never appreciated it.
Oh? Oh, didn't quite take to the system, did he? Never exactly certain whether the rice went under cereals or pastas. Always putting the tomato juice with the canned veggies rather than the beverages.
That I could live with. It's when he put the eggs in the cupboard, the frozen peas in the drawer, the rice in the freezer.
Mrs. Doubtfire gives an understanding chuckle, finds a tea, and then sits down while the water boils.
Divorced, are you, my dear?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Marriage can be such a blessing.
And divorce can be even more of one.
Mrs. Doubtfire hides her surprise. Miranda shifts in her chair, feeling a bit defensive.
My husband is a very difficult man.
Oh?
But the children are quite fond of him.
I can sense that. Oh, dear.
Now Mrs. Doubtfire begins setting up cups and sugar, pouring tea.
What?
Oh, nothing, really. I was just thinking back to the first little ones I looked after.
Oh. The napkins are in the...
But Mrs. Doubtfire has already found them. Miranda blinks.
It was a nasty divorce. Oh, but the children adored their father. Well, Mrs. Gorma felt he was a bad influence, so every chance she got, she kept Mr. Gorma away from his own sons. Would you believe one of those sweet little boys grew up to be the Yorkshire Ripper?
No.
I'm afraid so.
What about the other one?
Oh, Not so bad, not one. He'll be up for parole in 7 or 8 years.
God.
Most likely they just fell in with the bad lot, those boys. They don't really know what's environment and what's not, do they? You take milk, dear?
Yes.
Mrs.
Mrs. Dope.
Doubtfire opens the refrigerator and collects to herself.
Oh, my word! We do have some science experiments in here.
Daniel's specialty.
Men just aren't worth the trouble they put us through.
Mrs. Doubtfire begins tossing moldy jars from the fridge into the trash. Miranda smiles. There's something very reassuring about this woman.
Could you start tomorrow?
Mrs. Doubtfire beams. Exterior bus stop night. Mrs. Doubtfire boards a bus in front of Miranda's, taking a seat in front, right near the bus driver, a man in his 50s with a ruddy face and a pin-cushion gut. He smiles at Mrs. Doubtfire in the rearview mirror.
Evening, ma'am. Good night, isn't it?
He winks at her as the bus door swishes shut. Mrs. Doubtfire is mortified. She pulls her coat tightly over her droopy bosom. Exterior Daniel's apartment night. Daniel, still in his Doubtfire regalia, walks toward his apartment. He removes a key to open the door. He's interrupted by a voice.
Excuse me.
Daniel turns. Mrs. Sellner, the court liaison, stands behind him. He is caught. Mrs. Sellner squints at Mrs. Doubtfire.
Is this the Hillard residence?
Oh, yes, pet. I'm just his sister, staying with him, his much older sister.
You have his eyes. And I have appointed with him. Is he in?
Oh, probably has his headphones on. Oh, he's taking one of those cassette business courses. Always trying to improve himself, he is. Why don't I just go upstairs and send him down?
I'll come with you.
Mrs. Doubtfire hides her concern, turns the key. Interior Daniel's living room night. Mrs. Sellner enters, takes in the room. In addition to the general mess, there are now dresses and high heels strewn everywhere. Mrs. Sellner eyes them. Mrs. Doubtfire nervously gathers them up.
Some things of mine. I'm a messy guest, I'm afraid. Danny, dear, I'll just go get him for you.
She bustles off down the long hallway. Mrs. Sellner stares. Interior Daniel's bedroom. Daniel, panicked, wrestles off his costume, putting on a pair of jeans.
Daniel! Yeah? Oh, hi, sis. There's a Mrs. Sellner here. Oh, right. Yeah, we have an appointment. Mrs. Sellner, forgive me. I'm getting out of the shower. I'll be right with you. I think you'll be very pleased with me. I've become a new man, a model father.
Daniel places a latex mask on a styrofoam headstand that rests on a table beside the open window. Interior living room. Mrs. Sellner listens, takes a step. We hear the snap of a mousetrap. She jumps, looks down, frowns, begins to take notes. Daniel comes down the hallway wiping his face. He looks plausible as a person who just showered.
I've got 2 jobs, one with an educational film and TV company, heavy responsibility.
What's the other?
Cleaning houses.
Mrs. Sellner looks around the wrecked living room in disbelief, then back at Daniel.
Your sister is English?
Yes. Well, not originally. I mean, she was adopted by a British couple. They were living here at the time, but then they moved back, and she's my half sister, actually. Took us years to find her. Mother wasn't married at the time.
Mrs. Sellner removes a woman's stocking that annoyingly clings to her skirt. Daniel shakes his head.
Sis, not much of a housekeeper, but she makes an incredible cup of tea.
Oh, really? I'd enjoy a good cup of tea.
Daniel reads between the lines. His ass is on the line. He turns, head turned away from Mrs. Sellner, and calls down the hallway.
Oh, sis, Are you calling me Danny? Yes, could you come out here and I can't hear you, Danny.
Feigning frustration, Daniel turns to Mrs. Selner.
Her ears aren't so good, excuse me.
Daniel runs down the hallway. Mrs. Selner waits. Interior bedroom, Daniel slips out of his jeans, carrying on a conversation with himself.
Sis, are you in there? Oh, Daniel, it's bad enough you don't put the seat down. Oh, sorry. Oh, my goodness. When the bathroom door's closed, it means I want privacy. I'm sorry. Look, we were hoping you'd make some of your yummy tea. Oh, yes. Just give me a moment, please.
Daniel begins to put on his bodysuit. Interior living room, Mrs. Selner listens from the end of the hallway. She picks up one of the high-heeled shoes and marvels at the size. Interior bedroom, Daniel's in the process of wiggling into his bodysuit. He glances to the window. Daniel's POV. Two 13-year-old boys stare out the window, watching Daniel from their apartment across the street. They grin at Daniel. Interior bedroom. Daniel, suddenly angry, leans out the window to yell at the boys.
Hey, what the?
In his haste, Daniel knocks into the styrofoam head and mask. The head tips over. The latex mask falls out the window. Exterior apartment building alley. The mask drops out of the window, landing on the street below. Daniel stares, aghast.
Uh-oh.
Interior bedroom. Daniel moves to the window. Hurley puts on a bathrobe and the wig, trying to figure out what to do next. He peers out into the hallway. Interior hallway. Daniel, in his gray and brown wig, looks down the hallway. Daniel's POV. Mrs. Selner stands in the living room, her back to the bedroom door, steadying the high-heeled shoe. Daniel hurriedly sneaks out of the bedroom and down the hallway. Mrs. Selner is about to turn toward the hallway, and Daniel quickly ducks into the kitchen. Interior kitchen, Daniel, panicked, hurries inside, trapped. Interior living room, Mrs. Selner calls out.
I take sugar.
Interior kitchen.
Pardon?
Living room.
Sugar. I take sugar in my tea.
Kitchen.
Oh, sugar, tea. Oh, yes, pet. Coming right up.
A panicked Daniel fills a small pan with water, puts it on the stove. He turns, opens the cupboards, removes 2 bags of tea, and he runs to the window and looks out. Exterior apartment building alley. Daniel, looking to the ground below, a garbage truck speeds down the alley, smashing the DOUBTFIRE mask beneath its wheels. The flattened latex lies on the street, smiling up at Daniel in a bizarre parody of a tragedy mask.
Oh, shit.
Interior living room, Mrs. Selner turns, puzzled to hear Daniel's voice coming out of the kitchen. Interior kitchen, Daniel moves to the window, frozen, realizing what he's just done. Interior living room, Mrs. Selner takes a step toward the kitchen door.
Is everything all right in there?
Daniel madly rummages through the cupboards, searching desperately for something. He again assumes Mrs. Doubtfire's identity.
Oh, yes, dear. Everything's under control.
Interior living room, Mrs. Selner walks toward the kitchen.
I thought I heard Daniel's voice.
Interior kitchen, Daniel / Mrs. Doubtfire is frantically looking through the refrigerator.
The acoustics in this place are dreadful.
Interior living room. Mrs. Selner is now only a few steps from entering the kitchen. Inside the kitchen, the water kettle whistles. Daniel / Mrs. Doubtfire finally spots something in the fridge. 2 very ripe avocados. He quickly tears them both apart. Mrs. Selner enters the kitchen. Daniel's face is hidden behind the refrigerator door.
Your water is boiling.
Mrs. Doubtfire emerges from behind the refrigerator holding a carton of half and half, her wig a little crooked and green avocado junk covering her entire face. Mrs. Selner stares, puzzled.
Oh, my. I must be quite a fright in this getup.
Mrs. Selner doesn't say a word. Mrs. Doubtfire explains as she makes the 2 cups of tea.
My nightly beauty regimen. Mix 2 ripe avocados with 2 tablespoons mink oil and a dash of vitamin E, part of the special gift that I give myself each evening. Doesn't really eliminate any of the old wrinkles and pleats, but I like to believe it prevents new ones from forming.
Mrs. Doubtfire hands Mrs. Sellner the cup of tea. They walk into the living room. Inside the living room, Mrs. Doubtfire places Daniel's teacup on the table.
I hope you don't mind terribly if I don't join you. It's time for my Epsom salt bath. I find it's the most calming way to end the day. You should give it a try.
Really?
Does wonders for those varicose veins. Donny, the tea will get cold, dear. Oh, I'll be right there. Very nice to meet you.
Mrs. Sellner nods her head, staring as Mrs. Doubtfire's rear sways ever so slightly, sauntering down the hallway. Mrs. Sellner examines her own legs for any sign of varicose veins. Interior, Frank and Jack's apartment. The front door opens. Daniel stands at the door. Frank gives him a new Doubtfire mask. Interior, KTVU Television Studios, warehouse day. Daniel is busy packing boxes. A bell rings. Daniel looks at the wall clock. 2:30. Quitting time. Daniel stops what he's doing, runs to the exit, and punches out. Exterior bus station day, a few minutes later. Daniel runs inside, carrying his duffel bag. Interior of the men's room. The camera dollies by the rows of bathroom stalls, passing several pairs of men's feet, pants around their ankles. The camera stops on Daniel's 2 sneakered feet. One foot lifts, disappears for a moment. It comes back down wearing Mrs. Doubtfire's shoe. The other foot lifts, disappears, and comes back in a frame wearing Mrs. Doubtfire's other shoe. The camera pans up and Mrs. Doubtfire sneaks out of the stall. Exterior Hillard house later that day. The bus drops off Mrs. Doubtfire in front of the Hillard residence. She walks to the front door. Gloria, the next door neighbor, is working in her flower garden. Gloria spots Mrs. Doubtfire, rushes up to her.
You must be the new maid. Enthusiastic, dumbwider.
Mrs. Doubtfire turns to Gloria. At first, Mrs. Doubtfire's eyes fill with hate, rage, but her mouth turns into a perfect, polite smile.
Doubtfire. Euphigenia Doubtfire.
Gloria Chanley. Please, nice to meet you.
Mrs. Hillard speaks very highly of you. Mentioned that you helped her through a very trying time with her ex-husband.
That monster.
Oh?
Cheating on his wife.
No.
Beat her. Slapped her the kids around.
I never did any of those things.
Pardon?
He never did any of those things. I mean, Mrs. Hillard has never alluded to it.
She never would. Conjures up awful memories. I appreciate it if you wouldn't mention any of these things I told you to Mrs. Hillard. I may send her into a deep depression.
You have a confidant in me, pet.
I can see we have have lots in common.
Including your green thumb.
You're a gardener.
I was the horticultural supervisor at the estate of Reginald Waxflatter III, Duke of Sussex.
A duke? Really?
Oh, the gardens are stunning. Imagine a Monet canvas springing to life. And I achieved it with one simple formula.
What?
It's an old Doubtfire family secret. I've never divulged it to anyone.
I won't tell my soul.
Swear?
Swear.
Mrs. Doubtfire leans forward, her eyes darting around as if she were divulging top secret Pentagon documents. She whispers.
2 liters English breakfast tea.
English breakfast tea.
1 tablespoon brewed coffee grounds.
Coffee grounds, 1 tablespoon.
Brewed.
Brewed.
And finally, the key. Finally, the key to the formula,
Yes.
a splash of dog urine.
Dog urine.
When combined with the other ingredients, it results in a high potency fertilizer.
Well, and I put this mixture on the flowers every day.
3 times a day for optimum results.
But how do I go about getting dog urine?
You'll need to collect it. A difficult task, I assure you, but well worth it.
Gloria gives a nod. Mrs. Doubtfire smiles and walks to the Hillard front door. A note is taped to the door. It reads, "Dear Mrs. Doubtfire, the house needs cleaning. There are 3 loads of laundry. The bed sheets need to be changed, and I need cleaning supplies from the grocery store. Thank you, Miranda." Mrs. Doubtfire stares. This is tougher than being a dad. A quick montage. Music begins over various cuts of Mrs. Doubtfire. Doing laundry, vacuuming, washing windows, changing bed sheets, shopping at the grocery store. Interior kitchen later that day, Mrs. Doubtfire relaxes at the kitchen table, exhausted, hot, sweaty. Mrs. Doubtfire fans herself with a paper plate. Her bodysuit and dress are open, revealing Daniel's hairy chest. An open wrapper of Pillsbury oatmeal raisin cookies rests beside her. Exterior Hillard House day. Lydia, Chris, and Natalie arrived home from school. Inside the kitchen, hearing the kids, Mrs. Doubtfire stands, hurriedly pulling up her bodysuit and buttoning her dress. She removes fresh, steaming oatmeal cookies from the microwave. Inside the Hillard House foyer, the kids enter and pause, smelling something from the kitchen.
I smell cookies.
The kids are interrupted by the voice of Mrs. Doubtfire.
Welcome home, children.
Mrs. Doubtfire comes out of the kitchen with oatmeal cookies and 3 tall, cold glasses of milk.
An after-school snack?
Chris and Natalie run forward, grabbing a handful of cookies. Mrs. Doubtfire looks at Lydia, who is glaring up at her. "I'm not hungry." Lydia exits the room. A troubled look covers Mrs. Doubtfire's face. Inside the TV room, a few minutes later, Chris, Natalie, and Lydia sit on the sofa watching television. Chris and Natalie have finished their milk and cookies. Lydia holds the television remote. The Dick Van Dyke Show plays. Mrs. Doubtfire dashes in and turns off the television.
Time for homework.
After Dick Van Dyke,
Now.
we always watch Dick Van Dyke.
Not anymore.
With that, Mrs. Doubtfire takes the remote control from Lydia and drops it into the fish tank. The remote floats to the bottom amidst the curious fish. Chris and Natalie stare, wide-eyed, shocked. Lydia is furious. Mrs. Doubtfire gives a stern smile to the children.
Let's get something straight, shall we? From 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. every weeknight, I am in charge. And when I am in charge, you will follow a schedule. Those who will not follow my schedule will be punished.
She's lying. She'd never punish us. Interior Hillard living room a few minutes later. Mrs. Doubtfire sits, luxuriating in Daniel's favorite armchair, drinking an iced tea and reading the newspaper sports section. All around her, the 3 children are doing all of the housework. Lydia is vacuuming. Chris is doing windows. Natalie is dusting. Lydia angrily turns off the vacuum, looking at Mrs. Doubtfire. "This is exploitation. EXPLO.
Stop. Shut up, Liddy. You got us into this.
Are we ready for homework?
The kids all nod.
Anything but this.
Mrs. Doubtfire ushers them out of the room.
Go on.
Before they exit, Mrs. Doubtfire calls out.
Lydia,
Lydia turns.
your mother mentioned, well, She said you may need a little help studying for the spelling bee.
I don't need your help. Lydia turns, exiting the room with the other kids. We hear off-screen conversation as they walk upstairs. I miss Dad.
Me too. Me most.
Mrs. Doubtfire listens, a melancholy look on her face. Interior laundry room, later. Mrs. Doubtfire folds the laundry. The washing machine starts to chug and churn, spewing water and foam everywhere. Mrs. Doubtfire pounds at it, punches it, kicks it, and finally stops.
Son of a bitch.
The telephone rings. In his hurry and distraction, Mrs. Doubtfire answers in Daniel's voice.
Hello?
Interior, an auction house, crosscut between here and the laundry room. We see a furniture and painting auction in the background. Miranda is at a phone in the foreground. Stu is waiting for her nearby.
Daniel?
Daniel / Mrs. Doubtfire puts his head into his hands. Instantly, he assumes Mrs. Doubtfire's persona.
Now you give me that phone, Mr. Hillard. You don't live here any longer. The nerve of you. Hello?
Mrs. Doubtfire? What's Daniel doing there?
Oh, says he came by to drop something off. But I think he's just poking around myself. I don't know what possessed him to answer the phone. Oh, Mrs. Hillard does not want you here when she's not here. Now, are you going to leave or am I going to call the police? All right, I'm going. Sorry. You should be. Well, I've sent him packing.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you're there.
You know more than I.
Listen, I'm going to be a little late.
She glances at Stu, who smiles back.
I'll be home around 8. Could you start dinner for me?
Oh, of course, dear. Oh, don't worry about a thing.
Daniel hangs up, grimaces in panic. Interior Hillard kitchen, night. The camera pans a stove, a pot on every burner, sizzling mixed vegetables, boiling potatoes, frying fish fillets. Mrs. Doubtfire, reading from a cookbook, adds sweet basil to the fish, pouring a bit too much. The fish is smothered with basil. She attempts to scrape off the basil, and suddenly the potatoes begin to boil over. Mrs. Doubtfire grabs the pot, burns her fingers, drops the pot. Countless potatoes roll across the floor. A timed buzzer rings. Mrs. Doubtfire leans forward over the stove to stir the vegetables. Not accustomed to having large breasts, Daniel / Mrs. Doubtfire leans too close to the burning stovetop, and the tips of her breasts catch fire. Mrs. Doubtfire panics. She grabs 2 pot lids, slams them onto her breasts, putting out the flames. But the breasts continue to smolder. Large amounts of smoke are pouring out. Mrs. Doubtfire grabs a sink hose, sprays her breast with water, and puts out the fire. Mrs. Doubtfire stands, dripping, her blouse wet, slightly jarred. Mrs. Doubtfire looks at the stove. Thick black smoke emits from the fish. Mrs. Doubtfire grabs the pan, moving it away from the fire. The fish fillets are black, burnt, ruined. Mrs. Doubtfire tosses the pan into the sink. She glances to the clock. 7:28. Miranda will be home in a half hour. Interior Hillard kitchen, night. Close on Mrs. Doubtfire's hand as she fingers down the yellow pages of phone book to Valenti's Gourmet Takeout. Exterior Hillard house, night, later. A white truck, painted with the words Valenti's Gourmet Takeout, sits in the driveway. A teenage delivery boy stands at the front door holding 2 large shopping bags. Mrs. Doubtfire opens the door, stepping outside, closing the door behind her. She wears a cardigan sweater covering her charred breasts.
How much?
$135.27.
$135.
And 27 cents for dinner. $20 extra for rushing it.
Mrs. Doubtfire shakes her head, pays the boy, and closes the door. Close-up of a styrofoam container being opened by Mrs. Doubtfire, revealing a succulent shrimp dinner with a side of wild rice and vegetables. Mrs. Doubtfire scoops the dinner out of the styrofoam, carefully arranging it on a china plate. We hear an off-screen voice coming up. There we go.
Hello?
Mrs. Doubtfire panics, hurriedly removes all meals from their containers, putting the meals on plates and disposing the styrofoam into a garbage bag. Into your hallway, the kids run downstairs to greet their mother. Miranda puts down her purse and greets the children, hugging and kissing each one of them.
Where were you guys?
Upstairs, doing our homework.
Mrs. Doubtfire said we had to.
She did?
Miranda notices the brilliant spick and span quality of the house.
The place looks great.
Close up on a crystal dinner bell. Mrs. Doubtfire hands rings the dinner bell. Interior hallway, the pleasant bell ringing echoes. The kids are puzzled.
What's that sound?
It means dinner's ready. Come on.
Miranda and the kids hurry into the dining room. Interior dining room, Miranda and the kids open the swinging door and stop dead in their tracks. Smiles cover their faces. Even Lydia is impressed. The table is beautifully set, with lit candles, Waterford crystal, and perfectly pressed white linen tablecloth and napkins. Each plate looks good enough to grace the cover of Gourmet magazine. Mrs. Doubtfire pours Miranda a cold glass of Chardonnay, looking up with a matronly smile.
Dinner is served.
Miranda's expression is peaceful, happy. Lydia notices. Interior Hillard front hall a little later. Miranda has walked Mrs. Doubtfire to the door.
That was a wonderful dinner. And thanks with your help with Daniel.
Oh, no trouble. And I'm glad you mentioned it. He wanted me to give you this.
Mrs. Doubtfire hands Miranda an envelope. She opens it, finds cash.
What's this?
Oh, says here, child support.
What? There's no child support. He could never get that together.
Well, I guess he did, didn't he?
Miranda is staring at it.
I couldn't help but notice what a nice-looking man he is.
If you like the type.
Oh, tremendous charm in his own way, I thought.
Charm wears thin.
Well, that's that then. An absolute joy, your children.
Oh, I'm sorry. I promised to advance you the first week.
She starts with her purse, then looks at the envelope Mrs. Doubtfire just gave her. She flips through the money, hands it back.
This is much more than I was going to give you, but you're so much more than I expected.
Mrs. Doubtfire has difficulties repressing a grin and exits. Lydia stands at the top of the stairs watching. Exterior house night. Mrs. Doubtfire exits and she hears footsteps behind her. It's Lydia. She calls out, Mrs. Doubtfire?
Oh, Lydia. Oh, you get back inside the house this instant.
Look, I just wanted to apologize for being such a pain today. I'm really sorry. It's just, I'm still kind of messed up about everything.
We all are.
Huh?
I mean, I can understand the pain you're all going through.
I also wanted to thank you.
For what?
Making my mom so happy.
Oh,
She hasn't been in this good a mood since, well, I can't even remember. I mean, my dad never made her this happy.
oh, pity that.
I was wondering if, well, if you've got some extra time tomorrow, maybe you could help me with the spelling bee?
It would be an honor.
Well, I better get back inside. Thanks again. It's going to be pretty cool having you around after all. Lydia runs back into the house. Mrs. Doubtfire smiles. Exit. Exterior, bus stop night. Mrs. Doubtfire boards the bus. Interior bus night. Mrs. Doubtfire enters to find the driver leering at her once again. He lifts his jacket off the front seat, pats the seat, and winks at Mrs. Doubtfire. Music fills the soundtrack, and the montage begins. Exterior Golden Gate Park day. Mrs. Doubtfire looks stranger than ever, practicing soccer with Chris. Natalie and Lydia watch. Exterior Chrissy Field Day. Mrs. Doubtfire and the kids ride bikes near Golden Gate Bridge. Exterior Soccer Field Day. Mrs. Doubtfire and kids exercise and run on the beach. Inside Lydia's Room Day. Mrs. Doubtfire is drilling Lydia with spelling bee words. Interior Daniel's apartment night. Daniel, still dressed as Mrs. Doubtfire, luxuriates in an armchair, skirt hiked up to reveal 2 meaty, hairy thighs. He sips on a Michelob, watching a Julia Child cooking video and taking notes. Interior Hillard House Kitchen Day. Mrs. Doubtfire follows instructions, reading from an Italian cookbook. Lydia, Chris, and Natalie watch, giving Mrs. Doubtfire various spices as she requests. Mrs. Doubtfire dices peppers for a chicken cacciatore. Nearby, a pot boils water for pasta. Another cooks sauce. Things are under control. Interior San Francisco Thrift Store Day. Daniel and Frank are perusing the rack for some Mrs. Doubtfire clothes. A transvestite is watching them. Daniel brags to Frank.
I'm getting good at this. I can become a woman in less than 5 minutes.
No kidding. It took my friend Jeremy 10 months.
Exterior Hillard House Day. Mrs. Doubtfire walks to the front door. Something catches her eye. Gloria Cheney is sprinkling a brownish solution on her flowers. She smiles and waves to Mrs. Doubtfire, who waves back. Close-up of an illustrated page from Stuart Little. The camera pulls back. We are in Natalie's room. It is night. Mrs. Doubtfire reads aloud from the book. Natalie drifts off to sleep. Mrs. Doubtfire tucks her in, kisses the child's cheek. Mrs. Doubtfire hears a car door slam. She walks to the window and looks out. Mrs. Doubtfire's POV. Miranda is getting out of Stu Dunmire's silver Mercedes. He gives her a kiss to the cheek. Miranda walks and waves and walks into the house. Stu gets in his Mercedes and drives off. Mrs. Doubtfire stares, eyes filled with jealousy. Interior Warehouse Day. Daniel pushes a dolly filled with film cans through the studio. He passes a working set, complete with a television crew. Daniel pauses to watch. The crew is shooting a children's TV show. The middle-aged, hair-dyed, bulb-nosed host, Mr. Sprinkles, attempts a conversation with 2 puppets. Mr. Sprinkles is a near-comatose bore. His deadly, dull rap is putting the entire crew asleep. The cameramen, assistant directors, and production assistants sway and teeter, doing everything to stay awake. Daniel smiles to himself, continuing along. Exterior San Francisco Street Day. Mrs. Doubtfire walks across a busy street. She passes a young thug who grabs Mrs. Doubtfire's purse. Mrs. Doubtfire doesn't let go, holding on to her purse. The youth pulls harder. Mrs. Doubtfire glares at the youth, shouting in Daniel's voice.
Back off.
The contrast of Daniel's powerful voice booming from this old lady's voice completely freaks out the thug. He lets go of the purse and runs off. Mrs. Doubtfire smiles, continuing across the street. Exterior San Francisco Street Day. Mrs. Doubtfire walks across the crowded city street amongst the groups of gray-haired ladies. Mrs. Doubtfire, Exterior Hillard House Day. Mrs. Doubtfire gets off the bus, walks to the Hillard House. She notices a sparkling silver Mercedes parked in front. Mrs. Doubtfire steadies the Mercedes, suddenly interrupted by a panicked Gloria who runs toward her.
Mrs. Doubtfire, it's horrible, just horrible.
What is it?
Gloria leads Mrs. Doubtfire to her flower garden. The flowers have all withered. Their color is brown-yellow. Mrs. Doubtfire feigns horror.
Did you follow my instructions exactly?
2 liters English breakfast tea,
Yes.
1 teaspoon coffee grounds,
Brewed?
brewed,
And the dog urine?
a splash. What?
Increased to a dash.
A dash?
A dash.
A dash isn't different from a splash.
A dash equals 3 splashes.
Oh, right, of course.
Waste no time. Correct the formula and increase the application 5 times a day.
Gloria nods, troubled. Mrs. Doubtfire hides her smile, enters the house. Gloria stares at her flower garden in horror. Interior Hillard House foyer. Mrs. Doubtfire enters, hearing voices, laughter, echoing from the living room. She peers around the corner. Lydia, Chris, and Natalie are here, getting acquainted with Stu. Miranda sits beside him. Upon seeing Stu, Mrs. Doubtfire's eyes fill with anger. Miranda turns.
Mrs. Doubtfire,
Miranda, what a nice surprise.
Stu wanted to come by to meet the children.
He did?
Stu hops to his feet, moving to Mrs. Doubtfire.
Ah, this must be the famous Mrs. Doubtfire. Miranda's raved about you.
Odd. She's never mentioned you.
Stu isn't quite sure what to make of it. Even Miranda finds Mrs. Doubtfire's remark slightly out of character. Stu continues.
Well, it's wonderful to finally meet you. You know, I spend a good deal of my time in England. What part are you from?
Oh, all over, really.
Yes? Your accent's a little muddled.
Mrs. Doubtfire, can I speak with you for a moment?
Interior foyer, Miranda leads Mrs. Doubtfire back into the foyer. Stu talks with the kids in the background.
Would you mind staying a few extra hours this evening?
Stu, this is someone's name.
He's a client. Well, I mean, he'd like to be more. I don't know if I'm ready. It is tempting. Isn't he handsome?
The feminine confidences are too much for Daniel.
Oh, if you like the tall, rugged, handsome type. I prefer petite and humorous myself.
Well, he just wants to have a drink. I think it's pretty harmless, don't you?
Absolutely not. It can lead to sex, disease, and death.
I mean, it's mostly business. I'm going to sip club soda while we go over, well, wallpaper samples for the mansion.
Well, I wouldn't. I'd wait if I were you.
You would? Tell me, how long was it after Mr. Doubtfire passed away that you felt any desire to?
Oh, never. Never again.
Huh.
I think once the father of one's child is out of the picture, the only possible answer is total and lifelong celibacy.
Oh.
Mom, Stu's waiting. Miranda gives away to Mrs. Doubtfire. She joins Stu and the kids in the living room. Stu appears to be getting along quite well with the children. Mrs. Doubtfire watches, eyes ablaze. Interior Hillard's house, Lydia's room later that night. Mrs. Doubtfire practices spelling with Lydia. Mrs. Doubtfire pauses.
Well, excuse me, dear. Nature calls.
Lydia smiles, nods. Mrs. Doubtfire stands and exits. Interior hallway night. Mrs. Doubtfire walks to the end of the hallway, enters the bathroom, lightly closing the bathroom door. She lifts the toilet seat and begins to pee. Standing. The door is accidentally ajar, open a few inches. Chris passes by, stops, looks into the bathroom and sees Mrs. Doubtfire peeing like a man. His face pales, his eyes widen, and Chris screams. Into your bathroom. Mrs. Doubtfire turns, caught. Chris runs away. Mrs. Doubtfire adjusts her skirt and runs out after him.
Chris, wait.
Interior hallway night. Chris, in total terror, runs to Lydia's room. Mrs. Doubtfire follows in hot pursuit. Interior Lydia's room night. Chris dashes up to Lydia. Chris, what's wrong? Chris is too frightened, too breathless to speak. Mrs. Doubtfire enters. The panicked Chris finally blurts out to Lydia.
Dial number 911. Call the cops.
What? But why?
Her. She's a freak. One of those people I saw on Gerald.
What people?
You know, half man, half woman. There's a name for him.
Hermaphrodite.
That's it.
Herm.
Come on, Liddy. Shut up and call the cops.
Mrs. Doubtfire steps forward.
Now, let's just relax.
Lydia stands, grabs a tennis racket, brandishing it like a weapon. Stop, or you'll get it in the
Balls.
yeah. She's got him, right?
She's got everything.
Listen to me one moment. I'm not who I appear to be.
Oh, shit.
Watch your mouth.
Chris exchanges a shocked look with Lydia, whose face goes white at hearing her father's voice. Chris is even more shocked.
Dad?
Daniel nods, smiles. Chris is still horrified.
Dad?
Daniel nods again. Lydia lowers the tennis racket, mouth agape. Chris is still troubled at seeing his father in a dress.
You don't really like wearing that stuff, do you?
Not especially, but it was the only way I could spend time with you guys.
Chris and Lydia nod, beginning to understand. Lydia walks up to his father and touches his makeup. That's you under there?
Yeah.
Lydia smiles, embraces him. Daniel looks to Chris, who is still standing a few feet away. Daniel searches for a sign of his son's approval.
Chris?
Okay, it's cool. I get it. I don't want to give you a hug or anything. Not just yet. You understand?
Yeah, it's a guy thing.
Yeah.
Now, not a word of this to Mom, or it's back to just Saturdays for us.
The kids nod.
And don't tell Natty. She'll blow my cover.
The kids agree. Chris stares, still a little skeptical. Interior, Daniel's warehouse day. Daniel pushes a dolly of film cans through the studio. Once again, he passes the Mr. Sprinkles set, in the middle of a taping. The crew can still barely keep their eyes open. Mr. Sprinkles stands before a board with various pictures of dinosaurs. In his deadly, dull, bored monotone, he stares at the TV camera and explains dinosaurs. Dinosaurs first appeared in the late third of the Triassic period, about 225 million years ago. And their evidence is common in red rock deposits of that age. Daniel stops, shakes his head, looks over the man he thinks is one of the crew members standing beside him, a man standing in the shadows.
Can you believe they're still subjecting kids to this moron?
Oh.
This guy was putting me to sleep in front of the TV when I was a child.
Daniel begins to mimic Mr. Sprinkles, just a half second behind each word. The man listens, amused. Dinosaurs are commonly thought of as constituting a single natural group.
Dinosaurs are commonly thought of as
actually belong
constituting a single
Two
natural group.
distinct but related orders.
But they actually belong to
Reptile-like
two distinct but related
Saurischia
orders.
And the
Reptile-like
Ornithischia.
Saurischia and the bird-like Ornithischia.
Daniel makes a noise of a heart monitor stopping. The man, Mr. Lundy, standing beside Daniel, chuckles.
What kind of an idiot would let this guy stay on the air?
Me.
Pardon?
Jonathan Lundy.
Lundy? Lundy, as in Jonathan Lundy, the owner and general manager?
Mr. Lundy nods, and Daniel nearly faints.
Oh, great. Look, I really apologize. I have a tough time keeping my mouth shut. I didn't mean to criticize.
It's okay. I was canceling the show. I wanted to upload it before we go under. The ratings are in the toilet.
Yeah, I can see why. Maybe if the show were less
Heniad, Pestiran, monotonic.
Yeah, and you'd have to start all over. I mean, from scratch. And
The foreman interrupts, calls over to Daniel.
Hilliard!
yeah,
Get your ass to the truck. The shipment's got to make it past 6 o'clock flight. Make it 6 o'clock flights to LA.
You ever do a mental freeze frame on a single isolated moment in your day and then just say to yourself, this can't be my life?
Mr. Lundy chuckles, and Daniel turns to leave.
You'll excuse me. Nice meeting you, Mr. Lundy.
Daniel rushes off, Mr. Lundy watching him. Exterior Hillard House later that afternoon. Mrs. Doubtfire, carrying a grocery bag and a bouquet of flowers, comes up the street. A few feet ahead, Mrs. Sellner stands at the front door, chatting pleasantly with Miranda. Mrs. Sellner says goodbye. Miranda closes the door. Mrs. Doubtfire blanches in horror as Mrs. Sellner comes down the walkway toward her. Mrs. Doubtfire puts the bouquet of flowers up to her face, obscuring it as she slinks past. Interior Hillard Foyer. Miranda is still in the hall, hanging up her coat as Mrs. Doubtfire enters. Miranda is fuming.
Oh, you're home early.
I had an appointment at the court liaison, Miss Sellner. I just can't believe it.
What is that, dear?
She says Daniel has some woman living in his apartment, pretending she's his sister. I told her Daniel doesn't have a sister.
Mrs. Doubtfire is not happy to hear this. Miranda assists her with the groceries as they walk into the kitchen. Interior kitchen, Miranda and Mrs. Doubtfire enter. Miranda puts away the groceries while Mrs. Doubtfire prepares some tea.
Oh, I'm not sure Mrs. Selstrom is mistaken. How could he ever replace you, dear? And so quickly.
She's supposed to be older and very unattractive.
Miranda almost seems to be fixing Mrs. Doubtfire a suspicious look. Mrs. Doubtfire goes about making the tea.
Did you and Mr. Doubtfire ever... I mean, you must have had your share of problems.
Oh, yes. And Mr. Doubtfire, oh, yeah, like all married couples, but the bad times just seem to fade away as the good times adhere themselves to the memory. Oh, God rest his soul.
When did he pass on?
8 years this November.
What happened?
Quite fond of the drink, he was.
Oh,
He had just finished breakfast, the usual 6 pints. He left the house on his way to the local pub, stepped into the path of a Guinness truck.
how awful.
'Twas the drink that killed him. Quite literally, I'm afraid. Deep down, he was a good chap, a sainted man, even with his mountain of faults. I've learned that a flawed husband is better than no husband.
The tea kettle whistles. Mrs. Doubtfire stirs 2 cups, giving Miranda one, and they walk into the dining room. Interior dining room, they take a seat at the dining room table.
Well, who needs a husband when I've got you?
Oh, surely you don't mean that.
Yes, yes, I do. You have no idea what it was like being married to Daniel.
Now, what exactly was so horrible about Mr. Hillard, dear?
Well, at first, nothing. I mean, I guess it was always like that at the beginning of any relationship. Daniel was very romantic, very passionate.
Sounds like he was an absolute stallion, if you don't mind my saying.
Well, that part was always okay.
Mrs. Doubtfire is slightly offended by okay.
But it was Daniel's spontaneity I fell in love with. The other men I dated, they were so scheduled, so organized. They were more like me. And at the time, it was refreshing to find someone who was so different. And Daniel was funny, you know? He could always make me laugh.
Interior kitchen continued. Miranda fixes a gaze at Mrs. Doubtfire, who continues.
I've always said the key to a solid marriage is laughter.
Yeah, well, after a few years, it stopped being so funny. I was always worrying. He was always between jobs. I barely got to see the kids. And on the night I tried to get off early and spend time with them, I'd come home and the house would be wrecked. There were so many nights I would just cry myself to sleep.
Really?
Truth of the matter is, I didn't like who I was when I was with Daniel. I became a different person. And I didn't want my children to grow up with that woman as their mother. When he's not with me, I'm better.
Mrs. Doubtfire is silent, staring, fascinated by this revelation.
And I'm sure that Daniel's better without me. He just doesn't realize that yet.
I didn't know that.
Well, how could you?
The distant sound of off-screen music is heard, a slow, generic top 40 ballad. The music mixes with the kids' laughter. Mrs. Doubtfire catches herself.
You didn't, I mean, did you ever say anything to him?
Oh, Daniel didn't want to talk about serious things. I sometimes think Daniel can do anything in the world except be a normal, responsible human being. But that is what attracted me to him. I can get a little serious and careful sometimes.
The kids' off-screen laughter gets louder. Miranda stands, gives Mrs. Doubtfire a puzzled look. She walks into the living room. Interior living room, Miranda enters, pauses, touched by what she sees. Miranda's POV of the den. Some of the furniture has been moved to the side of the room, making room for a makeshift dance floor. Chris and Lydia are awkwardly practicing a slow dance to the music. Natalie stands a few feet away, beside herself with giggles. Mrs. Doubtfire walks up beside Miranda, who calls out to the kids.
What are you guys doing?
Natalie, Chris, and Lydia stop and turn, thinking they're in trouble. Is the music too loud?
We're putting the furniture back. They're just pretending for the spring dance, Mom.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You guys look like you could use some help, though.
He keeps stepping on my feet.
He keeps moving in the opposite direction.
Miranda laughs, moving forward to join the kids.
First, you need better music.
Miranda flips through the albums. Chris turns to Lydia.
Uh-oh. She's going for the records.
Miranda pulls out an old Van Morrison record. She puts it on the turntable. A scratchy, romantic ballad plays. Miranda turns to Chris, taking his hands, beginning to dance with her son. Their moves are at first awkward, but become smoother.
Jeez, Mom. I didn't know you could dance.
I wasn't always a nag, Chris.
Miranda and Chris continue to dance. Inspired, Lydia takes Natalie's hands. Natalie steps up onto Lydia's feet and they join in the dancing. Mrs. Doubtfire watches from the living room. She can hardly believe her eyes as Miranda and the kids dance, their collective laughter lighting up the room. Mrs. Doubtfire/Daniel watches, touched and amazed, not having seen Miranda like this in years. Mrs. Doubtfire turns and exits the room, leaving the family alone. Exterior school day, establishing shot. Interior, school auditorium day. The auditorium is packed with students and proud, hopeful parents. The contestants are seated to the right of the stage, their braces gleaming, glasses glistening. Lydia sits with the other contestants. She appears confident, prepared. The announcer sits at the left of the stage. A girl student stands at the microphone spelling a word. Antithesis. Antithsis.
That is correct.
In the audience, Chris and Natalie sit beside Miranda. At the rear of the auditorium, Daniel enters, late. He looks to the stage. Lydia spots Daniel. They share a smile. Daniel continues forward looking for his family. On stage, the girl student has just spelled another word.
I'm sorry. That is wrong.
The dejected girl returns to her seat beside Lydia. The audience politely applauds. The announcer calls the next contestant.
Lydia Hillard.
Lydia stands, walks to her microphone stand. Miranda and the kids are hopeful. Daniel arrives at Miranda's row of seats. Seeing there's no seat for him, Daniel is furious. On stage, the announcer gives Lydia the first word.
The word is vulnerable. Vulnerable.
Venerable. Venerable.
That is correct.
There is applause from the audience. Daniel walks to the seat of Miranda, speaking in a harsh whisper.
Where is my seat?
I tried to save you a seat.
Yeah, right. Just another attempt to keep me out of my children's lives.
Miranda glares at Daniel. On stage, the announcer drills Lydia with the next word.
The word is precedence. Precedence.
Precedence. Precedence.
Correct.
The audience applauds again. Meanwhile, Daniel and Miranda are not paying attention to Lydia. They are glaring at each other. Natalie tries to break the tension, pointing to the lady beside her.
We tried to save you a seat, Daddy, but this lady took it.
You should have gotten here on time.
Traffic was horrible.
Of course, the traffic patterns of your own hometown would take you by surprise.
Hearing his own words, Daniel gets even angrier. On stage, the announcer fires the next word to Lydia.
The word is discriminate. Discriminate.
Lydia is about to answer when she spots her family. She sees Daniel and Miranda arguing. She cannot hear the words, but the harsh expressions and tense body language is all too familiar to Lydia. The announcer gets Lydia's attention.
Miss Hillard, can you spell the word?
Discriminate. Can you give me a second? The announcer nods. Lydia tries to concentrate but can't help looking at her parents. Natalie, near tears, seeing the pain in Lydia's face, turns to her parents.
Guys, you're missing Liddy.
Daniel and Miranda pause, turns to the stage. Lydia attempts to spell the word. Discrima. Lydia's eyes brim. The silence in the auditorium is deafening. Even the announcer feels badly.
I'm sorry. That is incorrect.
Lydia goes back to her seat, defeated. Daniel is crushed. He glances at Miranda, who looks away. Tears stream down Natalie's face. Daniel and Miranda stare at each other. Daggers. Exterior school parking lot day. Miranda is loading the kids into the car when she sees Daniel a few yards away. She nods to Lydia, who goes running up to him. Daniel scoops Lydia up into his arms, and instantly she begins to cry.
I know, Lydia, I know, and I'm so sorry.
Lydia holds on to him and cries. Why can't you pretend?
What do you mean, honey?
You pretend to be Mrs. Doubtfire. You pretend to be Pudgy the Bird and all those other things. I couldn't. You and Mom just pretend to be happy.
We probably could have.
And then we could still be a family.
We could, but a pretend family isn't a real family. We would just be acting, and you can't act out a whole life. Life is real life. Acting is a job.
And it's your job to be our father. Daniel touches her chin, gently lifts her head to look at him.
Hey, I'm still here, aren't I? Rain or shine, I'm still your father.
Lydia considers. Her face softens. She purses her mouth with new resolve. I know. He hugs her again, harder than ever. He fights back the tears. Exterior San Francisco cable car, moving shot day. Mrs. Doubtfire, Miranda, and the kids ride the trolley, carrying beach bags. Exterior Claremont Country Club day. Miranda, Mrs. Doubtfire, and the kids walk up to an electronic gate. It opens, revealing, like Oz, the beautiful grounds beyond. An outdoor paradise. A stunning swimming pool, waiters, and gorgeous, perfect women. Mrs. Doubtfire and the kids stare in awe.
Would you look at this? Not a nose or pair of breasts that exist in nature.
Natalie excitedly points off screen.
There's Sue.
Natalie waves. Mrs. Doubtfire's eyes scan the diving platforms. Stu stands on the top platform. He looks tan and muscular with a washboard stomach and bathing trunks. He sees a family and waves. Mrs. Doubtfire bristles.
Be still my heart.
The kids wave to Stu. Mrs. Doubtfire watches, disgusted, as Stu does a perfect triple somersault dive. The kids are impressed. Stu surfaces, climbs out of the pool, strides up to Miranda, Mrs. Doubtfire, and the family. Stu gives Miranda a kiss to the lips, lingering a bit longer than Mrs. Doubtfire would prefer. Stu smiles at the others.
Hey guys, glad you can make it.
Your tummy looks different from my daddy's.
Mrs. Doubtfire almost winces.
Why don't you get into your suits?
The kids light up, excited.
Oh, no, I don't have a suit. I'm afraid I'm difficult to fit. Oh, you go, dears. I'll just sit here in the hot sun.
Are you sure? Well, your day's on me. Please order anything you'd like and put it on my tab.
Mrs. Doubtfire watches Stu, Miranda, and the kids head for the pool. Close-up of a draft beer as it's delivered to Mrs. Doubtfire. Sweat running down her face, her heavy makeup practically melting in the sun, Mrs. Doubtfire sits at the bar. She gives the waiter her empty beer glass and takes a long drink of the fresh beer. Mrs. Doubtfire stares at the pool. Stu, Miranda, and the three children are playing water basketball. Natalie is up on Stu's shoulders. Miranda, Lydia, and Chris are having a great time. Mrs. Doubtfire takes another drink of her beer. A stunning woman walks up to the bar to order a drink. Mrs. Doubtfire looks at the woman. Mrs. Doubtfire, letting Daniel take over for a moment, checks out the woman, staring admiringly. The woman looks up, notices Mrs. Doubtfire staring at her. Disgusted, the woman turns and hurries back to the pool. Mrs. Doubtfire, suddenly realizing what she's done, gets back into character. The bartender walks up to her.
Is everything all right, ma'am?
Peachy, just another beer, okay?
While this is going on, Stu gives Natalie to Chris, gets out of the pool, and crosses toward the bar. He gets the bartender's attention.
4 iced teas.
Hearing Stu's voice, Mrs. Doubtfire looks up with a start, then discreetly ducks back, out of sight, behind a bowl of tropical fruit used for drink mixing. The bartender pours the iced tea for Stu. Another club member, Ron, approaches Stu. Ron points to the kids.
Whose regrets?
Miranda Hillard.
Miranda Hillard?
The woman I'm seeing.
No kidding. You? The guy who's never having kids, doesn't want anything to do with kids, doesn't date women who have kids?
People change. I'm pushing 40. I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone.
But she's got a lot of baggage. 3 kids?
3 terrific kids. I'm crazy about them, especially the little Natalie. God knows they need some support and a stable father figure in their lives right now.
Mrs. Doubtfire bites her lip.
What about the real father?
The guy's a loser.
Mrs. Doubtfire does a Danny Thomas with her beer. Stu gathers the glasses of iced tea and heads back toward the pool. Furious, Mrs. Doubtfire looks around, making sure the coast is clear. She picks up a lime, pulls back her arm, and fires the lime at Stu's head. The lime smacks Stu in the back of the head. He turns, angry, immediately catches Mrs. Doubtfire's eye. Mrs. Doubtfire quickly points an accusing finger at a 10-year-old boy who runs by. She calls out to Stu.
Spare the rod, spoiled the child.
Stu pauses, glaring suspiciously at Mrs. Doubtfire. turns and keeps walking toward the pool. Mrs. Doubtfire smiles. Interior, a bus at night. Mrs. Doubtfire boards a bus, finds her money is no good with a bus driver. He covers the money slot with his hand.
Evening, milady. This one's on me.
Oh, don't be silly.
She tries to push his hand away, but he puts his hand on top of hers and leers in Mrs. Doubtfire's eyes.
I insist.
Mrs. Doubtfire tries to move her hand. He won't let go. He looks intently into her eyes.
I've been driving all of my almost 20 years now. Thinking about retiring lately, though don't know what I'd do with my time if I retired. Lost my wife 5 years ago.
Mrs. Doubtfire pulls back her hand. The bus driver smiles. Mrs. Doubtfire takes a seat beside an elderly lady who's heard all this. The woman smiles conspiratorially at Mrs. Doubtfire. There aren't many of them left for girls like us, hun. Interior KTVU Studios Day. Daniel passes the Mr. Sprinkle set. The lights are off. The equipment is covered. Not in use today. Daniel looks around. The area appears to be deserted. Daniel walks onto the set toward a table filled with plastic dinosaurs. Pointing to all the dinosaurs, Daniel pretends to be the host.
You'd think they'd pick better names for these guys. Names like Bill, Nancy, Pete. But no, we're stuck with Iguanodon, Styracosaurus, Ichthyosaurus. Well, who can remember that? These were creatures who ruled the earth, mighty, gigantic beasts with powerful, dynamic personalities, like this guy.
Daniel picks up the plastic Tyrannosaurus Rex, speaking in a thick, punch-drunk voice of a heavyweight boxer.
Tony the Tyrannosaurus. My arms may look tiny, but I can bench press 6 Cadillacs. And if I don't catch you for dinner, I'll eat 716-ounce T-bones. Extra rare. Hold the salad and veggies. Give them to...
Daniel picks up a plastic Apatosaurus, switching voices to a 60s flower child.
Apricot, the Apatosaurus, a strict vegetarian, and faint at the sight of a cheeseburger man. Only the crispiest palm trees and ferns will do. Strictly organic and natural. No preservatives. Oh, look who's flying overhead. It's...
Daniel picks up a plastic flying lizard, this pterosaur. He switches to Chuck Yeager, Delta Airline pilot voice.
Terry the Pterosaurus. We've hit our cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. Looks like there's a bit of turbulence in the Jurassic period, but with strong tailwinds from the Triassic period, we should be landing 5 minutes ahead of schedule in the Cretaceous period. So just sit back and enjoy your in-flight movie. And when dinosaurs ruled the earth, also known as when George Bush was president.
I'm sorry. There is sudden applause in the back of the studio. Daniel stops, turns, and sees Mr. Lundy clapping, standing a few feet away. He's been watching.
Very impressive, Mr. Hillard.
Oh, I didn't realize anybody was watching.
I'd like to take you to dinner. Here's some of our ideas, your ideas.
Who? Me? My ideas? Really?
Friday evening. Bridge Restaurant, 7 p.m.
Daniel nods. They shake hands. Lundy walks away. Daniel is hopeful. Interior Daniel's living room night. A very different room from what we saw earlier. Clean, homey, warm. There's even curtains and new furniture. Daniel clears the table what was obviously a home-cooked meal. I'm proud of you, Dad. He looks at her, touched. He turns to Natalie.
Natty, why aren't you eating? I thought spaghetti was your favorite.
Mrs. Doubtfire makes it better.
Daniel stares at her. She appears quite troubled, engrossed in twirling her spaghetti, lost to the world.
She's she's way goofed up, Dad.
Daniel pulls Natalie onto his lap.
Do you like Mrs. Doubtfire better than me, Natty?
She sees a lot more of Mrs. Doubtfire.
You're never home.
What do you mean?
I tried call you sometimes.
Daniel doesn't quite know how to respond to this one. He suddenly feels the need to explain to Natalie.
Look, Natty, there's something I have to tell you.
He's interrupted by the sound of the apartment. Bzzzer. Interior Daniel's apartment night. Miranda stands at the door, buzzing Daniel's apartment again.
Come on up.
Interior Daniel's apartment living room. Miranda enters tentatively, is mystified by the transformation.
I see you got someone to clean.
No.
Miranda blinks, doesn't know what to think.
Are they ready?
Well, they haven't had their dessert.
You cooked.
Cooked, baked. I may quote later after I finish jarring the preserves.
I really have to be going. I have an appointment.
Nobody has an appointment on Saturday night. It's that Stu guy, isn't it?
I don't want to get into this.
What do you see in him?
At least he's my own age.
What?
Your girlfriend?
My what?
Oh, come on, Daniel. I've heard all about her. The older woman. She must spend a good deal of time here. From the looks of this place.
You must be talking about Edna Bickers. She's a friend of my mother's. She stayed here one night and then went back to Miami Beach.
Right.
Miranda, she's an old woman. You think that after all these years, I'm instantly going to replace you? The way you're trying to replace me with Stu?
I'm leaving. Kids, come on.
The kids hurry to the door. Daniel gives her an envelope.
Child support.
Miranda pauses, looks at the envelope and smiles.
This is really, really great, Daniel. I'm impressed.
So give me another chance. Let me take the kids after school.
I can't just dump Mrs. Doubtfire. She's the best thing that ever happened to us.
Really?
The kids are doing better in school. Chris is actually passing all of his subjects. I find myself coming home early just to spend more time with them. We've never been happier, Daniel.
Well, that's just wonderful.
He hugs all of the kids, waves goodbye. Close up on Daniel's closet door. The door opens, revealing Mrs. Doubtfire's dress, wig, shoes, and mask. Daniel stands over the closet, frowning at the costume.
Homewrecker.
Interior Hillard House night, establishing shot of the house. Interior Hillard's house, Miranda's bedroom night. Miranda stands before a full-length mirror wearing a slip. She holds up 2 silk dresses, alternating them in front of her. One dress is red, the other blue. Both are short, with fairly low necklines. Lydia and Natalie lounge on their mother's bed watching. Mrs. Doubtfire, carrying laundry, passes by the bedroom door. Miranda calls out to her.
Mrs. Doubtfire,
Yes.
we need another woman's opinion.
Miranda holds up the dresses.
Which one?
What is the occasion?
My birthday. Stu's taking me out.
Neither.
Neither.
Far too revealing.
Really?
Why buy the cow if you can't get the milk? You can get the milk for free.
Lydia rolls her eyes. Miranda is confused.
Oh, what would you suggest?
Mrs. Doubtfire's eyes scan the dresses hanging in Miranda's open armoire. She points to a plain black cotton dress with a high neckline and a long skirt.
That one.
An incredulous Miranda picks up the black dress and stares at it.
This thing?
Very appropriate, tasteful, elegant, yet subdued.
I wore this to my aunt's funeral. She was a nun, a very old nun.
Lydia shoots an annoyed glance at Mrs. Doubtfire. Go with the blue one, Mom.
Yeah. It's the most fun.
Miranda again holds the blue dress over her slip, looking in the mirror. She smiles, likes what she sees, and nods.
I think I will.
Fine. Wear that dress, but I cannot assume responsibility for your virtue.
Lydia rolls her eyes. Miranda gives a sarcastic smile.
Don't worry, you'll be there to protect me.
I will.
Stu's invited you and the kids to dinner too.
How thoughtful.
Well, that way you'll be able to take the kids home afterwards.
And where will you and Stuart be going?
Drinks, dancing, you know.
When will this enchanted evening take place?
Friday night at 7.
This Friday night.
Mm-hmm. At my favorite restaurant, Bridges.
Bridges?
Friday at 7.
Bridges?
Yes.
Bridges?
Is something wrong?
I can't.
Why not?
I have other plans.
Cancel them.
Impossible.
Mrs. Doubtfire, I expect you to be there. I need you to take the kids.
Mrs. Doubtfire is concerned. How can she be in 2 places at once? Close up on an appointment book. A woman's hand turns pages in a very overbooked appointment diary. The camera pulls back. We are in the plush office of Mr. Lundy. The secretary turns the pages. Daniel stands across from the secretary. The secretary stops turning and looks at a desperate Daniel.
Mr. Lundy is completely booked for next 2 months.
But I'm willing to meet anytime, anywhere, any place.
I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do.
You don't understand. If I cancel this meeting, I could be blowing a big opportunity.
So don't cancel.
Daniel pauses, sighs, gives an appreciative nod, and exits. Exterior Bridges restaurant Friday night. Miranda, Mrs. Doubtfire, and the kids get out of the Volvo, dressed in their best. Stuart waits outside, looking natty in a stylish Armani. Stu gives a tender kiss and a single rose to Miranda. Mrs. Doubtfire glares. A stretch limousine pulls up. Mr. Lundy gets out, snatching his valet check as he passes the family. Mrs. Doubtfire looks at him in horror as he strolls within inches of her. Stu leads the family inside, directly behind Mr. Lundy. Interior restaurant night. A trendy California restaurant with 2 large rooms separated by potted palms. Mr. Lundy walks up to the maitre d', a respectable middle-aged fellow. Mrs. Doubtfire and the family wait in line directly behind Lundy. Good evening, Mr. Lundy.
I'm meeting someone. Has he arrived yet?
Mrs. Doubtfire looks away. The maitre d' scans the reservation list. No, sir, but I can seat you. Smoking or non-smoking?
Non-smoking, please.
Hector will seat you. Table 15. Hector, a young, well-groomed man, takes Mr. Lundy to table 15 in the opposite room, the non-smoking section. Stu steps up to the maitre d'.
Reservation for Dunmire.
Oh, yes, sir. Smoking or non-smoking?
Non-smoking.
You're smoking.
Mrs. Doubtfire, you don't smoke?
Oh, did for years. And the only way I can stop myself from lighting up is to be around others who smoke. I desperately need to ingest all that random nicotine. Hope you and the little ones don't mind, dear.
Miranda shrugs, looking at Stu. He doesn't mind. Looks at the maitre d'.
Smoking.
Table 39. Hector leads Mrs. Doubtfire and the family to table 39 in the smoking section. As Mrs. Doubtfire walks, she scans the non-smoking section. Mrs. Doubtfire's point of view moving through the potted plants. Mr. Lundy sits at a table alone. He checks his wristwatch. Miranda, Stu, and the family are seated. Mrs. Doubtfire pauses.
You'll excuse me. I need to freshen up.
Would you like a drink?
Chardonnay.
Stu nods. Mrs. Doubtfire rushes off. She walks past the bar, grabs a pack of matches, and hurries to the restroom hallway. Interior restroom hallway. Mrs. Doubtfire hurries to the telephone. She dials the restaurant telephone number from the matchbook. Interior restaurant entrance. The maitre d' answers the telephone. Hello. Interior restroom hallway. Mrs. Doubtfire speaks into the phone using Daniel's voice.
My name's Daniel Hillard. I'm having dinner with Mr. Lundy. Could you tell him I'll be a few minutes late?
I'll personally give him the message, sir. Mrs. Doubtfire hurries back to the table, passing the maitre d', who is headed for Mr. Lundy's table. Interior restaurant, Mrs. Doubtfire takes a seat at the table. Her glass of white wine sits in front of her. A joyous Miranda is hugging Stu.
Oh, Stu, it's just beautiful.
Have I missed something?
Stu's birthday present.
Oh,
Miranda extends her arm. A delicate but expensive diamond and emerald tennis bracelet dangles from Miranda's wrist. Mrs. Doubtfire hides her jealousy, taking a long drink of wine.
how glorious.
The menus are delivered. Natalie looks at her mother.
Mommy, I have to go.
Mrs. Doubtfire will take you.
No, you.
Miranda apologetically excuses herself and heads off with Natalie. Chris and Lydia examine the menus. Mrs. Doubtfire shifts closer to Stu, speaking softly to him out of the kids' earshot.
Quite an impressive birthday present.
Thank you.
Fellow gives a gift like that. He's hoping for a little gift in return, eh?
Pardon?
A bounce in the berth, a cozy conjugation under the covers, a boff in the boudoir.
She gives a girlish giggle. Stu is taken aback, slightly offended.
Mrs. Dumphy.
You did bring protection.
What?
You can't be too careful these days. Miranda's recently had a nasty spate of the clap, you know.
Stu's eyebrows shoot up. Mrs. Doubtfire feigns humbleness.
Oh dear, I'm being very blunt this evening. Must be the wine. Travels through my system faster than a Japanese tour group through Disneyland. Ooh, back in a flash.
She hurriedly exits. Stu gives a puzzled look to her and gives a smile back to the kids. Interior bathroom hallway. Mrs. Doubtfire dashes to the bathroom door. She begins to walk into the men's room. Natalie and Miranda exit the women's room. Miranda is shocked to see Mrs. Doubtfire entering the men's room.
Mrs. Doubtfire!
Yes.
You're going into the men's room.
Mrs. Doubtfire squints, reads the sign.
Oh, my word, I do need new glasses.
She enters the ladies' room. Miranda and Natalie walk back to the table. Interior the women's room, Mrs. Doubtfire dashes inside, locks the door behind her. She hurriedly takes off her dress, bodysuit, wig, teeth, and latex mask, becoming Daniel. He is wearing a shirt and tie beneath the dress. His long pants are rolled up to his knees. Daniel unrolls the trousers and moves to the sink. He washes off any remnants of glue and makeup, combs his hair, hangs the dress, bodysuit, wig, teeth, and mask on a hook inside the stall. Daniel removes the sports jacket from Mrs. Doubtfire's bag. He slips into the jacket, checks his look in the mirror. Good. He runs out. Interior bathroom hallway. The women's room door slowly opens. Daniel makes certain the coast is clear. It is. He rushes to Mr. Lundy's table. Interior, non-smoking section. Mrs. Lundy smiles upon seeing Daniel, who quickly pulls up a seat.
Sorry, I'm late. You got my message?
Would you like a drink?
A waiter hovers over them. Daniel glances over to Mr. Lundy's drink and then up to the waiter.
Whatever he's having.
Double, chavy. On the rocks. Scotch drinker. My kind of guy.
Daniel gives an uncertain smile. At Stu's table, the waiter appears, and Stu looks at all the kids.
Order whatever you'd like.
Miranda pauses.
We should wait for Mrs. Doubtfire.
Lundy's table. Lundy takes a long gulp of scotch. Daniel does the same, not wanting Lundy to think him a wimp. Lundy snaps the waiter.
2 more.
Daniel's in the middle of pitching Lundy.
You need a show that doesn't talk down to kids. Something of quality that's equally entertaining to the parents who are tuning in.
Lundy nods, listening to Daniel. 2 fresh scotches are delivered. At Stu's table, everyone is waiting for Mrs. Doubtfire. Miranda pauses.
I'll just go check on her.
Miranda stands, walks to the bathroom. Lydia and Chris exchange a worried glance. In the bathroom hallway, Miranda walks up to the bathroom door and knocks.
Mrs. Doubtfire, is everything all right?
Daniel spots Miranda at the bathroom door from his table. He knocks down the scotch, stops his pitch, nervously looking at Mr. Lundy.
Will you excuse me?
Daniel leaps to his feet and runs to the bathroom. In the bathroom hallway, Daniel sneaks behind a cigarette machine, hiding a few feet from where Miranda stands. She again knocks on the door.
Mrs. Doubtfire?
Daniel throws his voice, imitating Mrs. Doubtfire in a struggling voice.
Oh, I'll be right out, pet. Oh, these godforsaken corsets.
Do you need any help?
Oh, no. I'll be fine.
Miranda pauses, nods, and walks back to the table. Daniel looks around. When the coast is clear, he dashes back inside the bathroom. Interior bathroom, Daniel locks the door, runs to the stall, grabs Mrs. Doubtfire's costume and accessories from the door. He begins to get dressed. At Stu's table, Miranda sits back down.
She'll be out in a minute.
Daniel applies the glue in the bathroom around the eyes and neck of the mask and begins to spritz on some perfume. Perfume top opens. Mrs. Doubtfire is splashed with the entire bottle. At Stu's table, out of breath, Mrs. Doubtfire arrives at the table. Another glass of Chardonnay awaits her. The waiter looks down at her.
May I take your order, ma'am?
Mrs. Doubtfire flips open the menu, quickly perusing the selections. She takes a drink of wine, poach, and snaps the menu closed.
Poached salmon.
The waiter nods, looks to Stu.
Sir? I'll have the jambalaya. Can you make it that not spicy?
The waiter nods, walks away. Mrs. Doubtfire takes a long drink of wine, puts her glass down, suddenly looking down at horror. Mrs. Doubtfire's POV. The top section of Mrs. Doubtfire's teeth have fallen out, floating in the wine glass.
Oh, dear God.
Mrs. Doubtfire immediately covers her mouth with her hand as everyone at the table turns, seeing the floating teeth. Mrs. Doubtfire extends her top lip over her real teeth, creating the look of someone who's just lost her upper dentures.
Oh, how terribly embarrassing.
Mrs. Doubtfire fishes a teeth out of the wine glass. She stands.
Excuse me. I need to reapply my denture adhesive.
Mrs. Doubtfire dashes away. Stu exchanges a confused look with Miranda. Lydia and Chris exchange a worried, concerned look. In the bathroom hallway, Mrs. Doubtfire runs into the women's room. Interior women's room, Mrs. Doubtfire locks the door behind her and begins to remove her dress. At Lundy's table, Lundy is getting plastered. Daniel hurries back to the table and he sits down. A third, fresh double scotch awaits him.
I took the liberty of ordering you another scotch.
Bully.
Daniel takes a long drink. Lundy is staring at him, a bit startled.
Daniel,
Yes.
are you wearing ladies' perfume?
Daniel stops, shocked. He sniffs his shirt.
Oh, jeez. It must have rubbed off.
Rubbed off?
A woman I used to date, she's a waitress here. I ran into her on my way to the bathroom. Couldn't keep her hands off me.
You dog.
Daniel shrugs, wiggles his eyebrows, and takes another gulp of scotch. Interior bathroom. A gray-haired woman enters the bathroom. She opens a stall door, finds Mrs. Doubtfire's bodysuit, latex mask, wig, etc. hanging there. The woman stares in puzzlement. At Lundy's table, Lundy and Daniel are laughing, both getting a little drunk.
Does your waitress have a friend?
A friend.
I got the stretch outside. Maybe we could take the ladies out of the town. A little double date. What do you say?
I'll ask her.
Daniel stands, runs off. Lundy chuckles, has another sip of scotch. Interior women's room. Daniel enters. He opens a stall. Mrs. Doubtfire's costume is gone. Daniel's face goes white. Interior bathroom hallway. Daniel peeks out of the women's room, looks around, and stops something. Daniel's POV. The gray-haired woman is giving the maitre d' Mrs. Doubtfire's clothes. The maitre d' stares at the bodysuit and mask, confused, troubled. Daniel sneaks the maitre d's desk, slinking down by the potted palms as he passes near Stu and the family's table. At the maitre d's desk, Daniel walks up to the maitre d'.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a lost and found?
What are you looking for, sir?
My mother. She felt underdressed for such an elegant restaurant. She changed clothes, left her stuff in the bathroom.
The maitre d' pulls out Mrs. Doubtfire's costume pieces from beneath the podium, puzzled. Are these what you're looking for, sir? Daniel notices the man is puzzled by the bizarre bodysuit. He offers an explanation.
Mom's always been a little insecure about her figure.
Daniel's about to take the clothes when he is suddenly interrupted.
Daddy!
Daniel freezes. He turns, sees Natalie is pointing at him. Daniel quickly moves Mrs. Doubtfire's costume behind his back. Everyone else at Stu's table turns, looking at Daniel, who fakes a smile. Daniel carefully keeps Mrs. Doubtfire's costume concealed behind his back and passes them to the maitre d'.
I'll come back for those.
Daniel walks to Stu's table, a big, wide, phony smile on his lips. At Stu's table, Daniel arrives, breathless. Miranda's a little suspicious.
What are you doing here?
I've got a meeting with the studio general manager,
The general manager.
Mr. Lundy. He wanted to hear some of my ideas.
Oh,
And you?
it's mommy's. Oh, sorry.
It's Mommy's birthday.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, happy birthday.
Thanks.
Miranda squints at Daniel. There's a long pause. Daniel shrugs.
I'd better be going. Don't want to blow this one.
He rushes off. Miranda stares suspiciously. At the maitre d's desk, Daniel runs the desk. The maitre d' gives Daniel the costume, and Daniel runs back inside the women's room. Interior women's bathroom. Daniel enters. A woman is standing here. She sees Daniel and shrieks. Daniel shrieks back and runs out. Interior men's room. Daniel runs inside, locks the door, and changes into his costume. Exterior bathroom. Mrs. Doubtfire steps out. She turns and sees something. The waiter from Stu's table stands at the open kitchen window, complaining to the kitchen help.
Come on! I need the orders for table 39.
Relax, they'll be out in a few minutes. Mrs. Doubtfire smiles, getting an idea. Interior hallway to kitchen. A clothes rack, cluttered with white kitchen staff jackets and chef hats, is there. Mrs. Doubtfire dashes up and reaches for a jacket. Interior kitchen, the double doors burst open. Mrs. Doubtfire, dressed in a white jacket and chef hat, enters. The head chef, cook, and dishwashers look up.
May I help you?
How y'all doing? Fantine Devereaux, head chef, Bridges, New Orleans branch.
We have a restaurant in New Orleans.
We were the first, Puddin'.
The head chef doesn't know how to respond. Mrs. Doubtfire continues.
I'm here on behalf of my partners. They've asked me to review your kitchen, make sure everything's up to snuff.
No one told me about this.
Oh, then you would have been prepared, darling. We wanted to do a spontaneous survey.
The chef is puzzled. Mrs. Doubtfire moves fast, looking over all the orders. She comments on each dish. The first, a chocolate mousse. She dips her finger into the mousse and tastes it. Disapproves.
You've burnt the mousse. Start over. The angel hair is dreary. Oh, cumin, please.
The cook gives her a jar of cumin. She sprinkles some of it on the pasta. She moves to a fish dish and pokes at it.
Your scrod is undercooked. 2 more minutes.
She passes the plate back to the cook. She moves to the plate of jambalaya that sits in the corner with the other orders from the Hillard table. Mrs. Doubtfire tastes the jambalaya. Her face pinches.
Is this jambalaya or baby food? Cayenne, please.
It was a special request.
There is no special requests in the land of cuisine.
Mrs. Doubtfire takes a jar of cayenne red pepper. Body blocking what she's doing from everyone, Mrs. Doubtfire flips open the lid and pours over half the jar into Stu's jambalaya. She stirs the jambalaya, closes the cayenne jar, and passes it back to the cook. Mission accomplished. Mrs. Doubtfire looks around and gives a satisfied nod.
Everything else seems to be in good order. Keep up the good work, and if y'all are ever in Louisiana, please pay us a visit.
Mrs. Doubtfire dashes out. Everyone exchanges a puzzled look. Interior kitchen hallway. Mrs. Doubtfire whisks off the jacket and chef's hat. She runs off. At Lundy's table, Mrs. Doubtfire, breathless and more than a little tipsy, takes a seat across from Lundy. He is startled.
May I help you, ma'am?
What?
Daniel?
Daniel looks down, realizing he's wearing Mrs. Doubtfire's clothes. In the confusion, he's run to the wrong table.
Damn.
Why in God's name are you dressed like that?
Mrs. Doubtfire just stares at Lundy for a long time.
I don't. Well, I'd like you to meet the new host of your show.
New host.
Euthanasia Doubtfire. My expertise is the entertainment and education of children.
Lundy listens. Mrs. Doubtfire begins her impromptu sales pitch. At Stu's table, the dinners are delivered. A steaming plate of overly peppered jambalaya is placed in front of Stu.
Where is Mrs. Doubtfire?
I don't know.
I hope she's okay. Hey, this looks terrific.
Start. We shouldn't let anything get cold.
The kids eagerly begin to eat. Stu scoops up a forkful of jambalaya. A large shrimp balances on the edge of his fork. At Lundy's table, Daniel continues pitching as Mrs. Doubtfire. Lundy is fascinated.
There'll be a tea time where I'll read letters from all of my young fans, answering their questions.
Great idea. It personalizes the show for every kid in the audience.
Daniel nods. At Stu's table, Stu chews a jambalaya. He pauses, eyes widen. The food is incredibly hot. He panics, inhales, and the shrimp lodges in the back of his throat, and Stu begins to choke. He moves his hands to his neck. Miranda leaps to her feet, calling to the patrons around her.
Somebody help! He's choking!
At Lundy's table, Daniel and Lundy are suddenly interrupted by Miranda's call for help. They stand looking to the source. From Daniel's POV, Stu is on his feet, grabbing his throat. He's wheezing, unable to breathe, his face turning white. Miranda continues to cry for help.
He can't breathe! Does anyone know Heimlich?
Miranda's eyes meet Mrs. Doubtfire's across the room.
Mrs. Doubtfire, please help!
Mrs. Doubtfire pauses, runs to the choking Stu, grabs him from behind, places the balls of her fist beneath his ribcage. She squeezes hard. Nothing happens. Stu continues to choke. Mrs. Doubtfire squeezes harder, faster, applying such intense pressure she manages to lift Stu off his feet. He panics, arms flailing, legs kicking, and one of Stu's arms slams into Mrs. Doubtfire's wig. The wig falls off, landing on the floor. Stu's other arm slams across Mrs. Doubtfire's face. Mrs. Doubtfire's glasses fall off, landing on the floor. Stu suddenly coughs. The shrimp flies out of his mouth. He takes a deep breath. Saved. Miranda hurries to his side. Everyone turns to Mrs. Doubtfire, shocked to see Mrs. Doubtfire's face. Half of the Doubtfire mask has been peeled away from Daniel's face, revealing Daniel's eyes. The camera dollies toward Daniel's eyes. The camera dollies toward the family members, staring in shock. And the camera dollies toward the innocent face of Natalie. She makes a soft realization.
Daddy?
Daniel nods, peeling the remainder of the mask from his face.
Yeah, honey.
Miranda is stupefied.
Daniel.
Natalie giggles hysterically. Miranda is furious, ready to erupt. Daniel steps forward, trying to explain.
Miranda.
Don't come near me.
Miranda gathers up the kids.
Come on, let's get out of here.
Wait.
Miranda ushers Stu and the kids away. Daniel looks around. All of the restaurant patrons are looking at him. Daniel picks up his wig and mask, turns and hurries out of the restaurant. Exterior Hillard House a few minutes later. A taxi comes to a stop. Daniel, without makeup, but still in Mrs. Doubtfire's costume, gets out of the cab. He leans in the cab's passenger window to pay the driver. Gloria stares out of her window. She spots something. In Gloria's POV, Mrs. Doubtfire's body and rear end extend from the cab window, her face hidden inside the cab. Gloria exits the house, running forward, panic in her face.
Mrs. Doubtfire, I followed your instructions exactly, but my flowers, my plants, they're all dead. What am I gonna do?
Mrs. Doubtfire / Daniel moves out of the cab window, stands, turns, moving into the light, revealing to Gloria for the first time that she is, in fact, Daniel. He glares at her.
What do I look like, a fucking gardener?
Gloria's face drops. Her face goes white. She backs away, frightened, moving back toward her house, never taking her eyes off the Daniel. Daniel turns and moves up the steps. He enters the Hilliard house. Inside Hilliard House night, Miranda appears in the foyer as Daniel enters the house.
Please, I need to talk to you.
Miranda pauses, looks down at Daniel's costume. Her expression is filled with contempt.
Can't talk to you like that.
Daniel looks down the costume, nods, understands. Interior Lydia's room a few minutes later, night. Lydia, Chris, and Natalie are wide awake, seated at the edge of Lydia's bed. Their wide eyes are filled with worry, fear. Camera pans their faces as the sound of their parents' argument echoes from downstairs.
You sat there and let me serve you tea, encouraged me to talk freely about our marriage. I took my money for sneaking around the house uninvited.
The money always came back to you, and it was a job you wanted done, and I did it well. You said so yourself 100 times. I would have done it for nothing, but oh no, you wouldn't let me.
There is no excuse for what you did, Daniel. No excuse. I won't forgive you for it, ever.
I only did it to be near my kids.
What? They knew? Lydia? Chris?
The kids pause, stand, and move out of the room. Interior foyer, the kids appear at the top of the stairs. Miranda stands at the bottom of the stairs. Daniel's behind her. Fire in her eyes, she turns to them.
Did you know about this?
We thought you'd make him go home if you found out.
How dare you? How dare you encourage them to deceive me like this?
Mom, he just wanted to see us.
Right. Tell her how she was the one who reduced us to all this deceit.
He practically spits out the words. The children are frozen in pain.
She wants to throw our history away. She wants to throw our family away.
This family doesn't work anymore. It's more harmful for the children to have this family than it is for the kids to have a divorced family that they can adjust to.
Can they adjust to a mother who continually denigrates their father in front of them? Well, that only forces them to hide the feelings they have for me. Hide them from you. And that's dangerous because no one is very good at hiding their feelings from someone they love. And it might end up that they'll have to love you just a little bit less so they can keep their little secret more easily.
They won't stop loving me. I'm their mother.
And I'm their father. They won't stop loving me.
I hate you both. They turn to look at Lydia, her ashen face fierce with dignity.
So do I. Me too.
Natalie's face crumples. Chris puts both his arms around her as if protecting her from their parents. They go upstairs. Miranda and Daniel are left alone in the foyer, numbed by the reaction of their children. Miranda's voice calms.
It's time for you to go home.
Daniel nods, agrees. Miranda turns and walks up the stairs. Daniel watches longingly for a moment, opens the door, and exits. Interior courthouse, several days later. Day. Gloria Cheney's on the witness stand. Her voice is trembling.
This man passed himself off as a 60-year-old housekeeper. Came to the Hillards' home every day, cooked. He even did windows. Now I know I probably should have sound stupid not to have recognized him, but he was very clever about it. He obviously got professionals to help him. I mean, he definitely had a different nose.
Daniel shifts in his seat.
And he has huge, enormous breasts.
The judge suppresses a giggle. Gloria continues, spewing venom.
His hateful, twisted, deceitful man. He should be locked up, and he should never be able to be around those children ever.
The judge nods, looking to Miranda's lawyer.
Mrs. Robertson, any closing statement?
The lawyer shakes her head. The judge turns to Daniel.
Mr. Hillard, since you decided to act as your own authority, you are entitled to make a closing statement.
Daniel nods, stands. He begins very businesslike.
In the past 2 months, I have secured a residence, refurbished that residence to make it a more fit environment for my children. I am holding a steady job as a shipping clerk. I think I fulfilled the court's requirements. I wish I could tell you I was very sorry for my behavior. I really do. But they're my kids. I mean, I was never an obsessive type about anything, you know? But then all of a sudden, there's this child, and it's like somebody tears out your heart and puts it in a bassinet. So the idea of somebody telling you that you can't see them, you can't be with them, that's just not an option. And sometimes you're forced to go to extremes.
Like cross-dressing.
Well, yeah, sure, whatever it takes. I mean, this sole custody thing, you've got to understand, they can't live with Miranda.
Why must I understand this?
For starters, she doesn't have time for them. She's married to her job. I was the one who always took care of them. Even before they were born, I made sure she took her vitamins when she was pregnant. I made her stop smoking. I did all the shopping and cooking. Well, until Mrs. Doubtfire it was mostly takeout. I held Miranda's head over the toilet for months. I was the one who changed their diapers, untangled their mobiles.
Sorry. There you go.
Iced their birthday cakes. I was the mummy in the Mummy and Me's. I was the one who sat through those tedious gossip-infested neighborhood play groups. I took them to the dentist, held them down when they got stitches. I was the damn tooth fairy. Their teeth would rot under the pillow before she would even think to leave a quarter.
I was the one that was out earning those quarters.
Let him hang himself. Miranda backs down. Daniel pauses, realizing that he's let his emotions get the best of him. He softens and turns to Miranda.
I'm sorry for that, Miranda, really. I don't mean to indicate that she isn't a fine mother, a wonderful mother. I just want to give you an understanding of how much these kids and I have been through together, how strong the bond between us is. Look, Your Honor, I don't have many friends, no hobbies. I don't go out drinking or womanizing. I only have one thing in my life, my children. They're my everything. I beg of you, please don't take them away from me.
Tears fill Daniel's eyes. Finished, he takes a seat. Even Miranda is moved by his speech. But the judge is unimpressed, cold, unmoved.
Mr. Hillard, you have fooled a lot of people into believing that you are a 60-year-old woman. Now, no easy task. And your little speech seemed to be genuine and heartfelt. But I stress the word seen. I believe it to be a terrific performance by a gifted actor. I studied a study, well rehearsed, bit of theatrics. Nothing more. The reality, Mr. Hillard, is that your behavior in the recent months has been very unorthodox, extremely bizarre, and somehow demonstrated. You may have done irreversible psychological damage to your children. Only time will tell. I refuse to further subject 3 innocent children to your particular and particular and particularly harmful behavior. In this, it is the court's decision to award full custody to Mrs. Hillard.
Oh God, no.
I will grant Mr. Hillard supervised visitation rights every Saturday.
Supervised?
Yes. A court Lizanne will accompany you when you spend time with your children.
You can't do that. I'm not some kind of goddamn pervert.
That will be determined by a psychologist, not you. I am suggesting a year of psychological treatment for Mr. Hillard. We will reevaluate this case 1 year from now. Thank you.
He bangs the gavel. It's over. Daniel loses. Miranda is led out of the courtroom. Daniel calls to her, desperation in her voice.
Miranda, wait, you know I was telling the truth. Tell him.
Miranda ignores Daniel as she is led out of the courtroom. He calls out louder, more desperate.
Miranda, please. He doesn't know me. Tell him about me and the kids, how we are together.
Miranda glances back at Daniel. There is no sense of victory in her eyes, only a sense of melancholy, of sympathy, and a touch of regret. She walks out of the room, leaving Daniel alone in the courtroom. The camera cranes back to a long shot. Daniel becomes a small, beaten, solitary figure, all alone in the dark courtroom. Fade to black. Close up on a very fat, grumpy woman. Her expression is a combination of boredom, irritability, and arrogance. Miranda and the kids sit across from her in the living room. Miranda is conducting an interview for a new housekeeper. The woman is in the middle of rattling off a list. Jackson?
Oh. Don't do the laundry. Don't do the windows. Don't do carpets. Don't do bathtubs. Don't do toilets. Don't do diapers.
I haven't been toilet trained for years.
Don't do ironing. Don't do basements. Don't do dinners. Don't do reading.
Miranda and the kids exchange an alarmed glance. Next to your house, a few minutes later, the woman exits. Miranda and the children stand in the doorway.
We'll get back to you.
Miranda looks at the kids. They share a worried look. Miranda looks down to a sheet of paper in her hand. Close up on the list. The list reads housekeepers. There are several names. The first 10 names are crossed out. Miranda's hand comes into the frame and crosses out the final name on the list. Interior kitchen later that day. An overburdened Miranda is at the stove, cooking dinner and trying to conduct business on the phone. The kids sit at the kitchen table. Their expressions are melancholy, despondent. I miss her spaghetti.
I miss her jokes. I miss her stories.
Don't worry. There are a lot of people out there. We'll find somebody.
Nobody's like her.
Miranda gives a hopeless sigh. Admit it, Mom. Don't you kind of miss her?
No.
Mom.
No.
Mom.
Miranda pauses. The kids stare at her. She sighs, pauses, thinks.
Okay, I admit, things were nicer when she was around. The house always looked so warm, so homey. There was always a fresh cup of tea brewing. Our beds were already made, our clothes were. But she doesn't exist. It wasn't reality. We've got to stop referring to her as if she was a real person.
Miranda is suddenly interrupted by a voice.
Hello, my puppets.
Everyone freezes, looks at each other. The excited kids run out of the room. Miranda, confused, follows. Interior foyer day. The kids run into the foyer. But there's no one here. The sound echoes from the TV room.
So nice to visit with you again.
They hurry into the TV room. Miranda follows. Interior the Hillard house den. The kids run inside. Miranda right behind them. They see the source of the voice. Their faces are shocked. Mrs. Doubtfire is on television. Everyone looks at each other, speechless. They turn back to the TV. Mrs. Doubtfire sits on a rocking chair in a cozy living room set. She looks into the camera.
We have a very exciting show today. Now, first, a visit with Mr. Van Zandt, who is a member of the Greenpeace organization. He'll tell us all about endangered species and how we can help prevent the extinction of some of our most beloved animal friends. Then it's off to the local recycling center to see how all the old bottles and cans are brought back to life. And then
Miranda looks at the kids. They are totally enthralled. She's touched by the unexpected smiles on their faces. Exterior KTVU studio a few days later. Miranda walks up to the front gate and enters. Inside the studio, Mrs. Doubtfire sat. Mrs. Doubtfire is on stage, going over various countries and continents with Nigel, a monkey puppet. Upon finishing with the puppet, Mrs. Doubtfire turns the camera.
well, children, that concludes today's show. It's been such a treat spending this time with you. Oh, please tune in again tomorrow. Good night, my puppets.
Mrs. Doubtfire sits by the fireplace. Credits roll on the monitors. Miranda stands at the back of the studio watching. The director shouts,
Cut! That's a wrap! Thank you all very much.
The crew all shake Mrs. Doubtfire's hands. Mr. Lundy walks up to Mrs. Doubtfire holding a handful of trade papers.
We're a smash! #1 of our time slot. Calls from Cleveland, Dallas, Detroit, and LA, all interested in dedicating.
Mrs. Doubtfire smiles. Miranda calls from behind.
Daniel,
Mrs. Doubtfire turns, surprised to see Miranda.
Miranda?
can we talk?
Mrs. Doubtfire pauses, nods.
Wait here.
Miranda nods. Mrs. Doubtfire exits with Lundy. Interior the Doubtfire studio day later. The stage is dark, deserted. Miranda stands on the Doubtfire set waiting. Daniel enters, stops several feet from Miranda. Daniel's voice is cold, distant.
You wanted to talk? Go on.
First of all, congratulations.
The show? Yeah. Seems to be working out.
The kids, they watch it every day.
It's the only way they can spend time with their father.
Miranda pauses, a little guilty, takes a step forward.
Daniel, look, I know it's going to take a long time to get over all the fights, all the horrible things we said to each other. It's going to be a lot of anger for a lot of years. I know we'll be strong enough to deal with the pain, but the kids, sometimes I don't know if they'll ever recover. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be responsible for destroying their lives.
What do you want me to do? Put on a happy face and be sweet to you every time we're together? Jesus, Miranda, you took my kids away from me, forced me to see them under supervision, like I'm some kind of deviant. You knew, Miranda, that day in the courtroom, you knew I was telling the truth. And you just sat there and let the judge pass that contemptible sentence.
I was angry at all the lies, all the deceptions. I wanted to hurt you badly. I did a terrible thing taking away from your children. But I'd like to make it up to you.
Daniel listens.
Since all of this happened, I've been trying to make sense of it. And the only thing that I understand is I know in my heart to be true is that my children are better, happier people when Mrs. Doubtfire was a part of their lives. She brought the best in them. She brought the best in you. And they miss her terribly.
Well, you can still find her on Superstation 9 right after Bewitched at 4:30 p.m. 5 nights a week.
That's not enough.
Daniel
What are-
pauses, looking at her.
What are you saying?
A long pause. Miranda finally speaks.
The kids need you.
Daniel is taken aback. His expression is suddenly hopeful. Exterior Hillard House, afternoon the following day, establishing shot. Interior Hillard House den. The Mrs. Doubtfire show plays on the television screen. Lydia, Chris, and Natalie are watching the show. On screen, Mrs. Doubtfire sits on the sofa looking at the camera. There's a knock at the door.
Oh dear, someone is at the door.
Mrs. Doubtfire stands and walks to the door, opens it, and there stands Mr. Sprinkles, dressed as a postman.
Oh, look who it is. Our old friend, Postmaster Sprinkles. Who is today's letter from?
Katie Montgomery. All the way from Youngstown, Ohio.
Well, thank you very much, Postmaster Sprinkles.
Mrs. Doubtfire attempts to close the door, but Mr. Postman interrupts.
Mrs. Doubtfire, should we tell the children about the origins of United States Postal Service?
We did that last week, Mr. Postman. But thank you very much, dear.
Would the children be interested in the process of choosing historical figures for the face of our post stamps?
Maybe next time, Mr. Postman. Thank you.
The Hillard kids continue to watch television as the doorbell rings. Lydia gives a disappointed glance to her siblings. The new babysitter.
Hope it's not the one with the nose hair. Or the one with the 9-inch curled up fingernails.
I don't know. Mom didn't say who.
I'm so tired of all these new people. Don't more kids have the same people around all around the time?
Lydia gives a hug to Natalie. Miranda hurries into the room.
Guys, come on.
The kids reluctantly walk out of the room. Interior foyer, the kids take their places in the hallway. Miranda hurries at the door to open and opens it to reveal Daniel. He enters. The kids are shocked. They turn to their mother. What's going on?
I came by to pick you up.
Really?
Dad's going to be taking you guys for a few hours every day after school.
The kids exchange excited, joyous looks. Lydia looks to her mother. What about the court? All that legal stuff.
I already took care of it. There'll be no more supervised visitation, no more court or liaisons.
Just us?
Just us.
The kids' faces light. Natalie runs to Daniel and embraces him in the doorway. Lydia and Chris join in, hugging their dad. Tears of happiness fill their eyes. Miranda watches the scene, extremely moved. Daniel stands, motions for the kids to follow him outside.
Come on, guys, get your stuff. Let's go.
The kids hurry upstairs. Daniel and Miranda are left alone in the foyer. An awkward pause.
You want to come in?
I'll wait outside, thanks.
Daniel reaches for the door, about to leave. He glances back.
Miranda,
She turns.
thank you for returning my dignity.
Miranda nods. They share their first smile in months. a tender homage to their past. She smiles disappear, leaving a sense of melancholy and regret. Daniel turns and exits, closing the door behind him. Miranda is about to exit when she hears a familiar voice echoing from another room.
And Katie writes, "Dear Mrs. Doubtfire."
Miranda follows the voice into the living room. Inside the Hilliard house den, on the television, Mrs. Doubtfire manages to close the door before Mr. Postman can offer another suggestion. She takes a seat at a chair in front of the fireplace, beginning to read the letter. Miranda enters. Mrs. Doubtfire reads from the television screen.
2 months ago, my mom and dad decided to separate. Now they live in different houses. My brother Andrew says that we aren't a real family anymore. Is this true? Did I lose my family? Is there anything I can do to get my parents back together? Oh, my dear Katie, angry parents often get along much better when they don't live together, and they become better people and better mummies and daddies for you.
Miranda smiles, touched by the familiar words. Exterior Hilliard house, Mrs. Doubtfire's voiceover continues. Lydia, Chris, and Natalie run outside. Daniel opens the station wagon door for them as they pile inside. The camera cranes back as the station wagon drives away. The camera continues to pull back wider and wider, revealing the stunning San Francisco skyline as the station wagon disappears into the distance.
Some children have 2 mummies or 2 daddies. You may live with your grandparents or your aunt and uncle. You may have foster parents. You may live miles apart, scattered in different homes. You may not see each other for days, months, and sometimes years, but you will never break the ties that bind. Your family will live in your heart forever.
Fade to black. The end. Yay!
Yay!
Good job, you all. That was a lot of reading.
Oh my
Yes. Oh my god.
was. Gosh, that went by amazingly. Wow, it's already like 9:30.
10:30
We're,
for some
we're
of you.
an
Yes.
hour earlier than last Tuesday.
Oh
That's good.
man, that's great.
Oh.
I have to go, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sure it's late for everybody too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You may have heard one meowing earlier.
Yep.
Yes.
Let me,
But
Well,
but that was fantastic.
It was
Yes.
fun.
Makes me want to watch the movie now. Yeah.
That was.
And Gloria, oh,
Oh my
what a
goodness, what a nightmare.
horrible
Oh.
addition. She's not in the movie.
Oh, she's not.
Oh, really?
She's not.
Oh, she seems so out of
Oh.
place.
Yeah,
Wow.
she's so
Oh my
mean.
gosh.
I don't like her
The
at all.
whole like court scene with her, I was like, why is she the one representing this for like as like some of the witness and stand? This is such a weird person to witness this.
I know, she's like this nosy old neighbor that like no one should take seriously. It's like, really? She's kind of
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah,
Why isn't she
some-
watching the kids if she's so concerned about them? Like,
Mhm.
ew.
Talk
That
about
recipe,
meddler and
Oh,
the
yeah.
lies. Oh my goodness. So
Oh.
I'm really glad someone decided that she did not belong in this movie.
Yeah, because it just did not help this. I could see why they took her out as a character because she just wasn't good for the movie.
Well,
Pretty awful. Anyways, like that was just so much fun. This really made me nostalgic to watch it. I haven't seen this movie in years, and gosh, it was so much fun.
it was.
I
Thank
haven't
you
seen it at all, but I'm familiar with Robin Williams' work, and I could just hear his voice right on top of Vicky's the whole time,
Yeah.
and I can picture his actions and everything because he's just such an iconic actor.
Yeah,
That,
really, really amazing.
hmm
Yeah,
And I can hear
miss-
Sally Fields. I can actually hear Sally Fields' voice as Miranda too. Actually, funny enough, I'm like I can hear her as well. They were just such a great duo, dynamic. It was such a great.
Yeah.
The chemistry is really fantastic. And then you have, oh, what's his name?
Harvey.
Pierce.
No,
Pierce-
Pierce Brosnan.
Mhm.
Pierce Brosnan plays Stu, and it's great because he's such a straight man to both of them. It's fantastic. It's great.
And the children were
Yeah,
absolutely
they're
lovely.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And I
cute.
could hear Frank's voice too, even though again I haven't seen this movie. I can
I
recognize the
don't
actor.
remember who the
Harvey
actor
Weinstein.
is.
Is it Weinstein?
Is it really
Um,
Harvey Weinstein?
No, that's not right, is it? No,
Don't know.
It's
I
a
don't
wrong
remember.
but
I enjoyed playing Frank. He was fun.
Yeah, Frank and Jack are great. I do like it's
Uh,
funny how in some ways this movie is actually really kind of ahead of its time, but also like it's really
yeah,
classically the 90s. Like
yeah,
how progressive it is for the 90s. Pretty
Yeah.
great.
yeah.
yeah, the two
Oh.
mommies bit and two daddies bit.
Yeah, and how Jack and Frank are like really positive, like really like quite like they're a great couple, and it's like
Yeah,
it's just normalized, and also like the whole trans thing. It's really cool, and the cross dressing, like how it's yes, it's still the 90s and it's not super progressive, but at the same time it's also
yeah.
kind of progressive. It's pretty awesome actually. I really kind of like how it hasn't changed that much in 30 years. Oh my gosh.
Harvey Fierstein. That's who plays Frank.
Who is it?
Harvey Fierstein.
I'm gonna have to look to see who that is. I
Oh,
don't
right, right.
remember. All right, guys, I really do need to go. I have to run
We
to the
all
restroom.
do. We
All
all
Yeah.
need
right.
our sleep.
Bye, everybody on YouTube. I hope you guys had a lot of
See
fun
you
here.
guys.
Just hanging out.
Jackson, you were great. I loved all your characters.
Yes, you
Oh,
were
it was. I'm so
fantastic.
sorry. I could. Some of the words. There were so many big words. I was like,
You
You
did
had so
great.
many.
What is
You had
that?
so many. You were
Like
having
those-
such
And
a
then
hard time
I
with.
said Mrs. Doubtfire wrong. The
You
Dumpty or
did.
something.
Yeah.
I was
Dumb
like,
fear. It was so
That was
funny.
perfect though for that
Oh.
line.
oh,
Like
I was
there
like,
was
oh my
so
gosh.
many.
But
I
I
was
was
like,
happy.
poor
Longest.
you. I was trying not
I,
to. I was trying not to cry. I was like, no, don't
oh,
cry.
and I kept like changing words, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. I was like saying, I was loving playing the announcer. That one was fun. I love playing the spelling bee, just like you
Oh, yeah,
are
that-
correct. It's a
You
fun
are not
voice.
correct. I'm
It's
sorry. It's
Yeah,
fine.
it's a fun voice. I love it. I had a lot of fun balancing. I miss woman while I was going through all the lines, but I think I got everyone good.
Yeah, I think you did great. Like you did fun. All Vicky, all your voices were great. They were so
Oh,
Oh,
much
yes.
fun.
thanks.
I
No.
loved hearing the changing of voices for that one scene where it kept the dinosaurs
Oh
and you kept
yes.
changing. You had your little like fan for the
That was the pterodactyl thing.
the pterodactyl.
No, and I did mess up. I lost the English accent a couple of times.
You
They're just like,
did.
what accent am I doing even?
Not
I
sure.
don't know.
Which is fine because you're supposed to be muddled all over the place, right? According to Stu.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. Like, I mean, I like how they also just kind of left it up to like it's ambiguous, like whether her and Stu stayed together or they ever get together or what. It's very ambiguous. I mean,
Yeah.
Oh, do we know what we're doing next? And
Oh, I
it's
have
in
it
2
up. Let me
weeks,
see
right?
here.
I believe it is.
Schedule, yes. It should be up. Oh my gosh, did my cat erase everything? Coming out.
Oh no. Was that your cat in the background?
That was my cat in the background.
I
Yes.
could hear her. I could hear the cat. It was so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I honestly don't know because I have the folder open and there's nothing in it.
It's
no.
So my cat has a habit of stepping on the thing, so I'm gonna open up. I'm hoping it's actually printed off somewhere else too here, so I'll double check. But
Yeah.
like there should be something on this page, and it's totally blank at the minute. So,
Oh no.
That's not good.
yeah, I'm sure she could not erase the entire thing, so it must be just operator error here on my end. Figuring what's going on, but I'm taking a look here.
Well, you'll be posting it soon, so
Yeah.
we'll all be surprised.
I know.
I
It'll
know.
be a
I know.
happy
Interviews
surprise.
coming up soon, so
Oh,
I'm
Because
super
we're getting
excited.
with the
into that.
vampire. Oh,
For
Yeah,
that's,
interview with the
that's
vampire.
all in October, I think.
Yeah, I think that's October.
Look at the page.
Oh, was it Neverending Story? I know we did
have
a meeting
one for that somewhere.
I know
Uh,
we we're deciding what day to do that one again because we had to cancel that one. So.
All right, let's see if I can find it here.
Oh my goodness, for you.
It's okay. I'm sorry I asked the question.
It's okay. She'll figure it out. We'll get back
Yeah.
to you guys. We'll let you
Yeah.
guys know. Don't worry.
Well, thank you all for watching. If anyone's out
Thank
there.
you.
Here it is. Okay.
Oh, she
It's
found
got
it.
erased. I did find it. Let's see. What day is today? This is
3rd of
Oh, so
September.
next up is television episode Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh, that's what it was. Marvelous.
So it should be a
Mrs.
short one. And then, yeah, October we have the 3 kind of Halloween themed ones: Interview with a Vampire, Shaun of the Dead, which is a British.
That one's fun. That one
I
will be
love
fun.
that one. And Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Dracula, which is also fantastic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's going to be a scary October.
Yeah, so 3 films coming up, and then we got to stick in. Let's see, what was that? Never-ending Story somewhere.
Somewhere we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I hope I
Yeah.
get Lestat. That's the only one I want. All the other ones, I'm like, I don't care who I get, but I want Lestat. Lestat's my favorite. Anyway,
Well, have a great evening. What's left of it for you guys?
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
It was
Bye.
nice. See you. Thank you.
See you guys. Thank you so much. See you guys next
Bye.
week.
Yep.
Or next 2 weeks, rather. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody on the YouTubes.
Bye.